Oh, a new visitor from the woods. Welcome. Are you a lost wanderer, tired from a long journey? Then join me, sit beside the fireplace, and let me tell you some stories that may soothe your mood as you regain your strength. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also comment where you're watching from and what time it is. You all set? Good. Let's start the story with one of the most enigmatic figures in wizarding history, a founder whose ambition and convictions shaped Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry for centuries to come. In the misty valleys of medieval Britain, when magic was practiced in secrecy and wizards lived in fear of persecution, 4 extraordinary magical minds came together with a shared vision to create a sanctuary where young witches and wizards could learn their craft in safety. Among these visionaries was Salazar Slytherin, a wizard of exceptional talent and unwavering conviction. Imagine, if you will, a tall man with a long, thin beard that reached nearly to the floor, his piercing eyes observing all with calculating precision. His robes, emerald green and silver, swept the stone floors of the newly built castle as he walked its corridors, his voice soft yet commanding, speaking Parseltongue, the language of serpents, when he wished his words to remain private. The early days at Hogwarts were filled with camaraderie and shared purpose. Slytherin, alongside Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, and Rowena Ravenclaw, established the foundations of magical education that would endure for over 1,000 years. Each founder valued different qualities in their students, and for Slytherin, those qualities were ambition, resourcefulness, cunning, and a certain disregard for rules. But beneath the unity of purpose lay fundamental differences of opinion. As you sit here by the warm glow of the fire, consider the fractured times in which these founders lived. Witch burnings were commonplace, and those with magical ability often lived in hiding. It was against this backdrop that Salazar Slytherin developed his controversial belief that magical education should be reserved for those from all magical families, what would later be termed pure bloods. This belief drove a wedge between Slytherin and the other founders, particularly Godric Gryffindor, who welcomed magical students of all backgrounds. Their disagreement grew bitter, and as legend tells, culminated in a duel of epic proportions. Imagine the castle grounds trembling as 2 of the greatest wizards of the age unleashed their power against one another, spells illuminating the night sky with brilliant flashes of color. Following this rift, Salazar Slytherin departed from Hogwarts, never to return in his lifetime. But before he left, he created a hidden chamber deep within the castle, the legendary Chamber of Secrets. Whispered conversations in Slytherin common rooms for centuries spoke of this chamber, built without the knowledge of his fellow founders, and sealed until his true heir would return to open it and unleash the horror within. A basilisk, a giant serpent capable of killing with a single glance. The very stones of Hogwarts seem to hold their breath when the chamber is mentioned, as if the castle itself remembers the betrayal of one of its creators. The entrance was cunningly concealed in the most mundane of locations, a bathroom, and could only be opened by a parselmouth, ensuring that only Slytherin's descendants would be able to access it. As centuries passed, Salazar Slytherin's legacy continued to shape the wizarding world in profound ways. The house bearing his name developed a reputation for producing powerful, determined, and often dark wizards. The serpent became their emblem, the color green their identity, and ambition their defining characteristic. Perhaps no legacy of Slytherin had more far-reaching consequences than his emphasis on blood purity. This ideology was later embraced and distorted by wizards like Voldemort, who, ironically, was himself a half-blood. The notion that magical ability was somehow linked to ancestry became a poisonous belief that justified discrimination, cruelty, and eventually, warfare. Yet, it would be a mistake to view Slytherin's legacy as entirely negative. The qualities he valued, ambition, resourcefulness, determination, and fraternity among those of similar mind, are not inherently dark. Indeed, many great healers, inventors, and ministers for magic have emerged from Slytherin House, their cunning directed toward worthwhile ends. The Sorting Hat, that ancient magical artifact imbued with the wisdom of all four founders, still sings of Slytherin as the house for those of great ambition. It recognizes that the desire to achieve, to rise above one's station, and to leave a mark on the world can be a powerful force for good when tempered with compassion and wisdom. In the quiet corners of the Slytherin common room, beneath the black lake, where greenish light filters through the water above, students continue to debate Salazar's true intentions. Was he merely a product of his time, fearful of those who persecuted magic users? Was his concern for blood purity rooted in a practical desire to protect magical knowledge from those who might misuse it? Or was there a deeper prejudice at work? The truth, like so many aspects of ancient magical history, remains elusive. What cannot be denied is that Slytherin's influence extends through the corridors of time, touching the lives of countless witches and wizards who have walked the halls of Hogwarts. Even his physical legacy endures. The Locket of Slytherin, a heavy golden locket emblazoned with an ornate serpentine S, passed down through generations of his descendants, eventually becoming a receptacle for a fragment of Voldemort's soul. A Horcrux. Such a powerful artifact, created by Slytherin himself, speaks to his extraordinary magical ability. In the Chamber of Secrets, his statue stands tall and imposing, a monkey-like face with a long, thin beard that almost reaches the bottom of the wizard's sweeping stone robes. The basilisk coiled at his feet, ready to be awakened by his heir to purge the school of those he deemed unworthy. The very architecture reveals his vision, grand, secretive, and built to endure. What lessons might we take from the complicated legacy of Salazar Slytherin? Perhaps it is that greatness and flaws often coexist in the same person, that vision and prejudice can spring from the same mind, that intentions, however pure they may seem to their originator, can be twisted into something unrecognizable over time. As you sit here, warmed by the fireplace and perhaps growing drowsy with the telling of this ancient tale, consider the houses of Hogwarts not as rigid categories, but as different expressions of human potential. Slytherin's legacy reminds us that ambition without ethics can lead to darkness, but also that determination and resourcefulness are powerful tools for those who would change the world. The embers of the fire glow softly now, like the distant torches in the dungeons where Slytherin students have studied for centuries. As our exploration of this complex founder draws to a close, I invite you to ponder, if you could speak with Salazar Slytherin across the vast divide of time, what would you ask him about his true intentions, and how might his answer change our understanding of the house that bears his name? Chapter 2. The Many Faces of Nymphadora Tonks. The gentle rain taps against the windows tonight, creating a rhythm like whispered secrets, not unlike the soft sounds of transformation that accompanied one of the wizarding world's most remarkable talents. As the firelight casts shifting shadows across the room, let us explore the extraordinary life of a witch whose very identity was as changeable as the flames before us. Nymphadora Tonks. Born to Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born wizard, and Andromeda Black, a pure-blood witch who turned her back on her family's dark legacy, Nymphadora emerged into the world as something truly rare. A metamorphicus. Imagine possessing the inborn ability to change your appearance at will, without the need for potions, spells, or enchantments. From her earliest days, young Nymphadora delighted her parents by cycling through hair colors as she lay in her crib, from gentle pastels to vibrant violets, a kaleidoscope of possibility contained within one tiny infant. The name Nymphadora, chosen with love by her mother, was one that its bearer detested from childhood. "It's Tonks," she would insist, her hair sometimes flaring red with irritation when addressed by her full name. This preference for her surname revealed much about her character: practical, unpretentious, and decidedly her own person, despite her remarkable gifts. At Hogwarts, young Tonks was sorted into Hufflepuff, that house of loyalty, hard work, and fair play. The yellow and black common room, with its round doors like barrel tops, and the soothing sounds of badger cubs playing in the walls became her home for 7 years. One can easily picture teenage Tonks entertaining her housemates in the comfortable sunlit space, morphing her features to mimic professors or adding animal characteristics to make her friends laugh. Her abilities made her naturally gifted in concealment and disguise during aura training, yet she struggled, paradoxically, with the art of stealth. Those who knew her often tell of her remarkable clumsiness, a trait that stood in curious contrast to her physical gift for transformation. Imagine her tripping over the umbrella stand in the hallway of Grimmauld Place, sending it crashing to the floor for what seemed like the 100th time, her hair momentarily shifting to a bright pink of embarrassment before she laughed at herself. The training to become an Auror is notoriously difficult, requiring exceptional magical ability and character. Under the watchful eye of Alastair Mad-Eye Moody, Tonks honed her considerable talents, learning to duel with precision and investigate dark wizards with thoroughness. Her natural ability to alter her appearance became not merely a personal quirk, but a professional asset of immense value. By the time she qualified as an Auror, Tonks had developed a signature appearance she seemed to favor: heart-shaped face, dark twinkling eyes, and short spiky hair in vibrant shades of pink, purple, or blue. Her wand, sleek and responsive, moved with the confidence of someone who knew her craft well. Though she could have chosen to present herself in conventional beauty at any moment, she preferred forms that expressed her personality: bright, unconventional, and impossible to ignore. When darkness began to rise again in the wizarding world with Voldemort's return, Tonks did not hesitate to answer Dumbledore's call to join the reconstituted Order of the Phoenix. The second-floor drawing room of 12 Grimmauld Place, with its long wooden table and the lingering scent of Molly Weasley's cooking, became the backdrop for strategy meetings, where Tonks's youth brought vitality to a group still scarred from the First Wizarding War. It was during these perilous times that Tonks encountered a wizard who would profoundly change her life. Remus Lupin. Their love story unfolded against the darkening canvas of war. Complex, challenging, and ultimately tragic. Imagine the conflict in Lupin's gentle eyes as he resisted her affections, believing his lycanthropy made him unworthy of love. And picture Tonks, her usual vibrancy dimmed, her metamorphosis abilities temporarily impaired by the depth of her emotional distress as she navigated his rejection. Their eventual union was brief but meaningful. In the quiet moments between missions for the Order, one might have found them sitting together in comfortable silence, her head perhaps resting on his shoulder, her hair unconsciously shifting to turquoise as she relaxed in his presence. Their son, Teddy Lupin, would inherit his mother's remarkable ability, his hair changing color while still a newborn, a bittersweet echo of Tonks's own childhood manifestations. Tonks's work as an Auror during Voldemort's second rise required all her skills of disguise and deception. Consider her walking through Hogsmeade, appearing as an elderly witch with silver hair, her wand concealed but ready in the pocket of her robes, eyes alert behind the facade of wrinkles she had conjured. Or infiltrating suspicious gatherings, her features adjusted to blend in while she gathered crucial intelligence for the Order. The field of battle was where her abilities shone most dramatically. In the Department of Mysteries, witnesses spoke of her dueling prowess, spinning, ducking, firing spells with precision, her appearance sometimes shifting involuntarily with the intensity of her focus. Though she was eventually overcome by her own aunt, Bellatrix Lestrange, in that battle, the encounter demonstrated both her courage and the personal cost of her decision to stand against the darkness. After recovering from her injuries, Tonks was stationed at Hogsmeade to help protect Hogwarts. The cobblestone streets of the village, which normally resonated with student laughter during weekend visits, became instead the patrol ground for a vigilant Auror. Perhaps she found moments of respite in the 3 broomsticks, warming her hands around a butterbeer, her tired eyes scanning the room even in apparent relaxation. The Battle of the Astronomy Tower marked another crucial moment in Tonks's story. Having been stationed outside the room of requirement with other Order members, She fought bravely when Death Eaters infiltrated the school. Later, in the hospital wing, as Bill Weasley was being treated for his wounds, Tonks finally confronted Lupin about their relationship in front of witnesses, a moment of emotional courage as significant as any she had shown in combat. Their marriage and the birth of their son came during the darkest days of the war. The small cottage they shared became a brief haven. Imagine the nursery with its color-changing mobile spinning gently above Teddy's crib, the walls painted with magical creatures that moved slowly across the surface. In these rooms, for fleeting moments, they created normality amidst chaos, their love a defiant light against the encroaching darkness. The final battle of Hogwarts called them both to action. The great hall, with its enchanted ceiling reflecting the tumultuous sky outside, had been transformed into a command center and field hospital. Tonks had initially stayed behind with Teddy, but, unable to bear not knowing Lupin's fate, left her son with her mother and joined the fray. In the chaos of battle, amid flashing spells and crumbling stone, Tonks fought with all the skill her years of training had given her. The ancestral home of magical education became her final battleground. She fell at the hands of Bellatrix Lestrange, her own blood relation, a tragic symmetry in a war that had torn apart so many families. Yet the legacy of Nymphadora Tonks extends far beyond her untimely death. In her son Teddy, raised by his grandmother Andromeda with frequent visits from his godfather Harry Potter, her gift lives on. More importantly, her example of living authentically, of using one's unique abilities in service of what is right, of loving despite obstacles, of maintaining humor and humanity even in dark times, remains a powerful testament. The raindrops continue their gentle percussion against the glass as our story of Tonks draws to a close. Her life reminds us that identity is both something we are given and something we choose, that we all wear many faces throughout our lives, though most of us cannot change them as literally as she could. The true magic of Nymphadora Tonks was not in her ability to transform her appearance, but in her unwavering commitment to remain true to her core self regardless of the face she wore. As sleep perhaps begins to gentle your thoughts, consider this. If you possessed the rare gift of a metamorphosis, which would be more challenging, changing your appearance to match any face you desired, or finding and remaining true to your authentic self beneath all those possible transformations. Chapter 3. The interpretation of divination signs. Mist curls around the base of crystal balls and rises from teacups like whispered possibilities, carrying the tantalizing promise of knowledge yet to come. Tonight, as shadows lengthen and the boundaries between present and future seem to blur, let us explore the mysterious art of divination, that most imprecise and yet most fascinating branch of magic that has captivated wizards and witches throughout the centuries. The desire to pierce the veil of time, to glimpse what lies ahead on our path, is perhaps as old as magic itself. In the earliest days of wizarding society, those with the rare gift of the seeing eye held positions of great respect and sometimes fear. Imagine ancient gatherings where robed figures would fall silent as the seer among them began to speak in tones not quite their own, their eyes rolling back as prophecies poured forth, words that might shape the destiny of entire magical communities. The North Tower at Hogwarts has long been home to the teaching of this elusive art. Picture the circular classroom with its heavy perfume of incense, the small tables with their shimmering crystal balls, the shelves lined with teacups and celestial models, all bathed in a dim, reddish light filtered through draped scarves. The very air seems thick with possibility, or perhaps that is merely the excessive heat from the ever-burning fire that makes students drowsy as they attempt to discern what might be genuine vision from mere imagination. Throughout the history of magical education at Hogwarts, divination has maintained a curious position, sometimes respected, often ridiculed, but always drawing those students who feel called to understand its mysteries. For every 100 students who peer fruitlessly into crystal balls, seeing nothing but their own reflections, there may be one with genuine aptitude. And very rarely, Someone with true inner eye is born, a genuine seer whose prophecies, however infrequent, carry the weight of inevitable truth. The methods of divination are as varied as the cultures from which they emerged. Tassomancy, the reading of tea leaves, relies on interpreting the patterns left behind after drinking a cup of tea. The rim represents the present, the sides the near future, and the bottom the distant future. A committed practitioner might spend years learning to distinguish between seemingly similar symbols. Does that clump of leaves represent a sun, promising great happiness, or a skull, portending grave danger? Crystal gazing requires a different approach, the clearing of the mind, allowing the consciousness to float free, while maintaining just enough focus to recognize the visions that might appear in the swirling mists within the orb. Those who have experienced genuine visions describe it not as seeing an image upon the glass, but rather feeling as though one is falling into the crystal itself, witnessing scenes unfold all around. The movement of planets and stars forms the basis of astrological divination, perhaps the most mathematically precise form of the art. In the quiet hours of midnight, a student of astrology might be found on the astronomy tower, charting the positions of celestial bodies with careful attention. Each planet carries its own significance: Mercury governing communication, Mars conflict, Venus relationships, and their alignments and oppositions are believed to influence events below. Palmistry invites the diviner to read the story, written in the lines of a person's hand, the heart line revealing emotional life, the headline intellectual capacity, the lifeline vitality, and major life changes. A skilled chiromancer can detect subtle variations in depth, breaks, and branches that might indicate important turning points or inherent tendencies in character. Cartomancy, divination through cards, takes many forms across the wizarding world. While Muggle playing cards may be used in some traditions, the most respected cartomancers favor specialized decks with rich symbolic imagery. Each card drawn represents not merely its face value, but layers of potential meaning that shift depending on its position and relationship to other cards in the spread. Perhaps the most controversial method taught at Hogwarts is the interpretation of dreams. In the flickering firelight of dormitory conversations, students might share their nighttime visions, searching for meaning. Is that recurring dream of flying without a broomstick a sign of future freedom or impending fall? Does the appearance of a deceased relative carry a message or merely reflect the dreamer's own unresolved emotions? The interpretation of omens in everyday life, from encountering certain animals to the patterns in spilled potion ingredients, forms yet another avenue of divinatory practice. The sight of a grim, that spectral black dog, has made many a wizard's heart stop in fear, believing death to be imminent. Yet how often has this omen merely reflected existing fear rather than genuine foresight? What makes divination particularly challenging as a field of magical study is the impossibility of consistent verification. Unlike transfiguration, where the success or failure of a spell becomes immediately apparent, or potions, where the brewing either achieves its intended effect or does not, divinatory predictions often concern events that may unfold gradually or in unexpected ways. Professor Sybil Trelawney, with her oversized spectacles that magnified her eyes to several times their natural size, her numerous shawls and glittering bangles, became somewhat notorious for predicting student deaths year after year, predictions that fortunately rarely came to pass. Her dramatic pronouncements in her misty, ethereal voice often seemed more theatrical than genuinely prophetic. And yet, it was this same Sybil Trelawney who uttered the prophecy that would shape the entire wizarding war, the prophecy concerning the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. This paradox lies at the heart of divination's contested status in magical education. Even those with genuine seeing ability may go years or lifetimes between true prophecies, filling the intervening time with the more mundane practices of the art. A genuine seer rarely remembers their own most significant prophecies, entering a trance-like state from which they emerge with no recollection of the words that passed their lips. The distinction between fortune-telling and true prophecy is subtle but crucial. Fortune-telling, with its everyday predictions of tall, dark strangers and unexpected windfalls, may occasionally strike accurately through chance or keen observation of human nature. But true prophecy carries a different quality, an inevitability, a sense that the words once spoken have set events in motion that cannot be easily diverted. Consider the Hall of Prophecy within the Department of Mysteries, row upon row of dusty glass orbs, each containing the record of a prophecy given and preserved by the ministry. The cool blue light emanating from these shelves casts an eerie glow across the faces of those few who have been permitted to walk those secretive corridors. Each sphere represents a moment when the future reached back to touch the present, when words shaped destiny. The most famous prophecy of recent wizarding history, that concerning Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort, demonstrates both the power and the danger of divination. Spoken by Trelawney during her job interview with Albus Dumbledore in a small room above the Hog's Head Inn, the prophecy was partially overheard by a Death Eater, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to years of darkness and eventual light. One might wonder, had the prophecy never been made, or never been overheard, would events have unfolded differently, or was the prophecy itself merely a reflection of what was already destined to occur? This raises philosophical questions about the nature of time and fate that have occupied magical theorists for centuries. Does the seer glimpse a future that is fixed and unchangeable, or does the act of prophecy itself create possibility, with human choices determining which possible future will manifest? The Department of Mysteries contains not only the Hall of Prophecy but also the Time Room, suggesting a connection between these profound magical mysteries. For the ordinary witch or wizard, lacking the rare gift of true seeing, divination may still serve as a tool for reflection and guidance. The symbols that appear in tea leaves or crystal balls, whether or not they truly predict the future, invite contemplation of possibilities and preparation for potential challenges. The careful study of astrological charts encourages consideration of cycles and patterns in one's life that might otherwise go unnoticed. Hogwarts students approach the subject with varying degrees of skepticism and belief. Some dismiss it entirely as woolly guesswork, preferring the certainties of charms or transfiguration. Others approach it with open-minded curiosity, recognizing that even if they lack the inner eye, there may be value in understanding the traditions and methods of this ancient magical practice. Those few who do possess genuine aptitude describe it not as a controllable skill, but as something that happens to them, flashes of insight that come unbidden, dreams that reveal events before they occur, sudden knowledge without obvious source. For these rare individuals, the study of divination techniques provides a framework for understanding and possibly channeling their natural gifts, though the most significant prophecies will always remain beyond conscious control. The centaurs of the Forbidden Forest practice their own form of divination through astronomical observation, regarding human methods as simplistic and narrowly focused. Their time scale extends far beyond human concerns, reading in the slow dance of planets and stars the grand patterns that may take centuries to unfold. To a centaur, predicting a single human's fate seems almost trivially specific when compared to their cosmic perspective. Professor Firenze, the centaur who briefly taught divination at Hogwarts, attempted to bridge this gap in understanding, teaching students to look beyond individual symbols to broader patterns. In his classroom, transformed to resemble a forest clearing with a starry ceiling overhead, he emphasized that even centaurs may misread the heavens, that the future is always in motion, written and rewritten as choices are made and events unfold. The practice of divination reminds us that magic, for all its concrete effects and precise incantations, retains elements of mystery that resist complete understanding or control. In a world where teacups can be transfigured into teapots with a wave of a wand and a clearly spoken spell, the mist-shrouded realm of prophecy and prediction stands apart. Less reliable, perhaps, but touching on deeper truths about the nature of time, possibility, and fate. As our exploration of this mystical branch of magic draws to a close, the patterns in the fire seem to shift, perhaps forming images that hint at stories yet to come. The boundaries between knowing and not knowing, between present and future, remain as intriguing as they are elusive. In this space between certainty and possibility, divination makes its home. As you drift towards slumber, perhaps your mind will wander through the realm of dreams, where past, present, and future sometimes mingle in ways that transcend ordinary understanding. What signs and symbols might you encounter there? And would you recognize them as mere reflections of your waking thoughts, or as glimpses through windows that open onto paths not yet taken? Chapter 4. The Dangers of Knockturn Alley. The shadows lengthen as twilight descends, and even the warmest hearth cannot entirely dispel the chill that accompanies certain tales from the wizarding world. Tonight, we venture down a crooked side street where sunlight seems reluctant to reach, where storefronts display items better left untouched, and where whispered conversations fade at the approach of unfamiliar footsteps. Welcome to Knockturn Alley, the shadowy counterpart to Diagon Alley's warmth and wonder. While most young witches and wizards eagerly anticipate their first journey to Diagon Alley, with its colorful shops and bustling atmosphere, parents sternly warn their children to stay clear of the narrow turning that leads to Knockturn Alley. Imagine the abrupt transition as one steps from the cheerful cobblestones of Diagon Alley onto a darker, narrower path. The air itself seems to change, becoming cooler, heavy with the scent of strange herbs and ancient dust. Sounds dampen, colors fade, and even in midday, shadows seem to linger unnaturally deep in doorways and corners. The origins of Knockturn Alley stretch back nearly as far as Diagon Alley itself. In the early days of London's magical district, when the boundary between magical and muggle worlds was less strictly maintained, Knockturn began as a place for the sale of ingredients and artifacts that required discretion, not necessarily due to darkness, but often due to muggle superstition and fear. Over centuries, as magical society became more regulated and certain types of magic fell under ministry restriction, Knockturn Alley's reputation solidified as a haven for those whose interests skirted the boundaries of legality. The winding lane twists and turns upon itself, creating disorienting angles that sometimes seem to defy ordinary geometry. A visitor might swear they've passed the same leering gargoyle twice, only to find themselves facing an entirely unfamiliar stretch of shops. Whether this confusion is by magical design or merely clever architectural trickery remains a matter of debate among those few scholars who study the alley's peculiarities. Of all the establishments that line this dubious thoroughfare, none is more notorious than Borgin and Burke's, a shop specializing in unusual and ancient magical artifacts. The storefront features a display of objects that would give pause to even experienced wizards: a withered hand on a cushion, the Hand of Glory, which provides light only to its holder, a blood-stained pack of cards, cursed necklaces that have claimed multiple victims over the centuries, and masks that seem to follow passers-by with empty eye sockets. Step inside, if you dare, and the bell above the door announces your presence with a discordant jangle. The interior greets visitors with the musty scent of old magic, not the clean, bright magic of charms and transfiguration taught at Hogwarts, but something older and less tamed. Glass cases line the walls, their contents carefully labeled in spidery handwriting. Mr. Borgin himself might emerge from the shadows, rubbing his hands together, his obsequious manner barely concealing calculating eyes that assess not just the contents of your purse, but your knowledge, connections, and potential usefulness. The founding partners, Caractacus Burke and his associate Borgin, established their business with a simple but effective premise: they would purchase magical objects whose owners might be eager to part with them discreetly, often paying far less than the item's true worth. These acquisitions would then be sold to collectors with specific and sometimes unsavory interests. Burke himself once purchased Salazar Slytherin's locket for a mere 10 galleons from a desperate Merope Gaunt, never revealing to the poor woman that she held one of wizarding history's most valuable artifacts. One might wonder about the types of customers who frequent such an establishment. Some come furtively, collars turned up and hats pulled low, hoping to avoid recognition. Others arrive with arrogant confidence, like Lucius Malfoy, secure in their social position and political connections, openly conducting transactions that might raise ministry eyebrows. And occasionally, innocent visitors stumble in by accident, like young Harry Potter, who once found himself in the shop after a mishap with flu powder, witnessing the secretive dealings of the magical elite. What sort of items might change hands in these shadowy transactions? A cursed opal necklace that has claimed 19 Muggle lives, a vanishing cabinet that forms half of a paired set, creating a passage between distant locations, poisonous candles that emit vapors causing sleep so deep it borders on death, books bound in materials one prefers not to identify, their pages containing spells and rituals deliberately excluded from standard magical education. Not all of Knockturn Alley's businesses deal in such overtly sinister merchandise. Noggin and Bonce offers shrunken heads that serve as dubious home security systems, calling out warnings when strangers approach. The Spiny Serpent sells exotic and sometimes illegally imported reptiles, including species with magical properties not recognized by magizoologists of more conventional bent. Moribunds, a dusty bookshop wedged between larger establishments, specializes in obscure magical texts, many harmless but forgotten, others deliberately obscured from mainstream magical knowledge. The Coffin House, with its black-draped windows and permanently displayed funeral wreaths, caters to those with interests in necromancy and the preservation of remains through magical means. Though necromancy itself is strictly controlled by ministry decree, the establishment maintains its operation through careful wording of services offered and a clientele discreet enough to avoid drawing official attention. Ye Old Curiosity Shop, despite its whimsical name, deals in objects of genuine antiquity and occasionally terrible provenance. Hidden among harmless medieval curiosities and Victorian magical gadgets may lie artifacts whose history includes tragedy, possession, or worse. The proprietor, a witch of indeterminate but considerable age, possesses an encyclopedic knowledge of magical history's darker chapters, but shares this information only with those she deems worthy, or who meet her considerable price. Beyond the shops themselves, the alley harbors individuals whose services are sought by certain segments of the magical community. In the deepest recesses of shadowy taverns, deals are struck for ingredients that cannot be obtained through conventional means. Hags cluster in doorways, offering fortune-telling services of questionable accuracy but undeniable unpleasantness. Figures in heavy cloaks conduct whispered negotiations for services best not named in polite company. The atmosphere of Knockturn Alley changes with the seasons and times of day. During winter mornings, fog clings to the cobblestones with unnatural persistence, obscuring the ground so completely that one must step carefully to avoid treading on whatever, or whoever, might be huddled in recesses. Summer evenings bring a different quality of shadow, as shops that appeared abandoned in daylight suddenly show signs of activity, colored smoke occasionally drifting from chimneys in shades not produced by ordinary fire. During the height of Lord Voldemort's power, Knockturn Alley became something of a recruitment ground. Death Eaters would identify potential sympathizers among those who frequented certain establishments. Conversations in back rooms would turn to politics, to the necessary changes in wizarding society, to the restoration of old values and practices. Many a young wizard or witch, seeking to prove themselves knowledgeable in dark matters, found themselves drawn into circles from which extraction proved difficult or impossible. The Ministry of Magic maintains an uncomfortable relationship with Knockturn Alley. Officially, Aurors conduct regular patrols and inspections, confiscating items that clearly violate magical law. In practice, the alley operates under an unspoken understanding. Businesses maintain a veneer of legitimacy, keeping their most problematic activities out of plain sight, while the ministry avoids too thorough an investigation that might reveal connections to influential magical families. During particularly troubled times, such as the Second Wizarding War, this uneasy balance shifted. Ministry raids became more frequent, but paradoxically less effective, as information about impending inspections somehow reached shopkeepers in advance. Meanwhile, the alley's darkest corners served as meeting places for those supporting Voldemort's regime, the narrow passages providing countless escape routes should danger approach. For the average witch or wizard, Knockturn Alley represents a place of cautionary tales, somewhere one might glimpse in passing, but would never linger. Parents use it as a warning to children who show too much interest in forbidden magic. That's the sort of thing they sell in Knockturn Alley, they might say with significant looks, immediately marking the subject as inappropriate for decent magical society. And yet, the alley persists through centuries, serving as a reminder that magic itself is neither inherently light nor dark. It is the intention, the application, the consequence that determines how we judge magical practices. Some of history's most dangerous dark wizards have been known to frequent Knockturn Alley's shops, but so too have researchers seeking rare texts, healers in need of uncommon ingredients for difficult cases, and even aurors working undercover to monitor suspicious activities. The boundary between acceptable and unacceptable magic has shifted throughout wizarding history. Items once sold openly in Diagon Alley may now be found only in Nocturn's shadowy shops, not because the objects themselves changed, but because society's understanding of their potential for harm evolved. Conversely, practices once considered dark may gradually gain acceptance as their benefits are demonstrated and safeguards established. This fluidity of magical ethics finds physical expression in the very layout of the alley itself. The precise point where Diagon Alley ends and Knockturn begins has shifted over the centuries, sometimes advancing, sometimes receding, reflecting the changing attitudes of the magical community toward certain types of magic. During conservative periods of ministry control, Knockturn seems to shrink, its enterprises becoming more secretive. In times of magical innovation and experimentation, the boundary blurs, with borderline businesses operating in a gray area between the two thoroughfares. Even the most respectable witches and wizards might occasionally find legitimate reason to venture into Knockturn Alley. A defense against the dark arts professor might seek a specific cursed object to demonstrate protective countermeasures to advanced students. A historian of magic might need to consult a text preserved only in Moribund's dusty archives. A potions master might require a rare ingredient available nowhere else for a complex healing brew. These visitors move quickly, purposefully, their business conducted with minimal conversation and no browsing. They do not make eye contact with the alley's more permanent denizens, the hunched figures who seem to materialize from the shadows, offering services or goods in hoarse whispers. They ignore the subtle glamours that attempt to draw their attention to certain shop windows, displaying items tailored to the viewer's secret desires or fears. As our journey through this disquieting lane draws to a close, the shadows seem to deepen further, as if reluctant to release those who have glimpsed their secrets. The border between Knockturn and Diagon Alley represents more than a physical transition. It marks the boundary between magic openly practiced and celebrated, and that which remains hidden, controversial, potentially dangerous but undeniably part of the complete tapestry of magical knowledge. The next time you find yourself in Diagon Alley, perhaps collecting school supplies or enjoying an ice cream from Florian Fortescue's parlor, cast a glance toward that narrow turning where the light seems not quite able to penetrate. Consider the shadow side of magic that exists there, not to seek it out, but to understand that magic in all its complexity includes both brilliant light and deepest shadow. As your eyelids grow heavy and sleep approaches, I invite you to consider what would draw you into Knockturn Alley despite its dangers, and what item or knowledge would you find there that might be worth the risk of venturing into those shadows. Chapter 5. The Creation of the Philosopher's Stone. The amber glow of candlelight dances across ancient leather-bound books, illuminating yellowed pages filled with symbols and formulas that few have ever comprehended. Tonight, as stars trace their eternal paths across the heavens, we shall delve into one of alchemy's greatest mysteries, the creation of the legendary Philosopher's Stone, an object of such extraordinary power that it transformed the life of one wizard and tempted many others across the centuries. The story of the Philosopher's Stone is inextricably linked with the remarkable life of Nicholas Flamel, a wizard whose quiet existence belied his extraordinary achievement. Imagine, if you will, a modest alchemist's workshop in medieval Paris, the air thick with the scents of herbs, metals, and mysterious compounds, walls lined with vessels of every shape and size, and at a simple wooden table, a man with patient eyes and steady hands conducting experiments that would eventually lead to an unprecedented magical breakthrough. Nicholas Flamel was born in the late 14th century, a time when the boundaries between magical and muggle worlds were less clearly defined. Wizards often practiced their arts alongside muggle trades, hiding their true abilities in plain sight. Flamel established himself as a scribe and bookseller, his shop becoming known for rare texts and manuscripts. This profession served him well, allowing access to ancient knowledge while maintaining a respectable facade for non-magical neighbors. The quest for the Philosopher's Stone was not unique to Flamel. Alchemists, both magical and muggle, had pursued this legendary substance for centuries before him. What set Flamel apart was his extraordinary patience and methodical approach. Where others sought quick transformation and immediate results, Flamel understood that true alchemical mastery required decades of careful study and precise experimentation. The foundations of Flamel's eventual success lay in his acquisition of a mysterious book, an ancient text attributed to Abraham the Jew, containing cryptic diagrams and formulas related to the transmutation of substances. The story goes that Flamel purchased this manuscript from a traveling merchant who did not recognize its true significance. For 21 years, Flamel labored to decipher its contents, making pilgrimages across Europe to consult with scholars who might help interpret its obscure symbolism. Picture Flamel in his later years, silver-haired but bright-eyed, hunched over his workbench in the soft light of dawn. Glass vessels bubble over, carefully controlled flames, metals shimmer in crucibles, and meticulous notes record each minute change in color, texture, and property. The process of creating the Philosopher's Stone was not a single grand ritual, but rather a progression of intricate steps, each building upon the last with exacting precision. The alchemical concept of solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine, formed the philosophical foundation of the stone's creation. Base materials would be broken down to their essential natures, purified through repeated processes, and reconstituted in harmonious proportion. Flamel's innovation appears to have been in the precise sequence and timing of these transformations, perhaps influenced by astronomical alignments that he tracked with careful attention. The actual composition of the Philosopher's Stone remains one of wizarding history's most closely guarded secrets. Historical accounts describe it variously as a red powder, a crystalline substance, or a small, unassuming stone with a deep ruby hue. Whatever its physical form, its properties were nothing short of miraculous. The ability to transform base metals into pure gold, and most significantly, to produce the elixir of life, a liquid that would grant immortality to its drinker. By 1418, Nicholas Flamel had achieved what countless alchemists before him had only dreamed of: the successful creation of the Philosopher's Stone. With his wife Perenelle at his side, he began to experiment with the stone's properties, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they understood the extent of their discovery. The transformation of lead into gold was perhaps the most famous application of the stone, but for Flamel, this aspect held more academic than practical interest. While he could have amassed untold wealth, historical records and magical accounts suggest that Flamel lived modestly, using his alchemical gold primarily for philanthropic purposes. He founded hospitals, renovated churches, and provided for orphans and widows, maintaining the facade of a successful but not extraordinarily wealthy merchant. Far more significant to the Flamels was the elixir of life, distilled from the stone through a process requiring both alchemical expertise and precise wandwork. The elixir needed to be consumed regularly, accounts suggest once per year, to maintain its life-extending effects. With each dose, the drinker's body would be renewed, halting and even reversing the physical deterioration of aging. Imagine the quiet mornings when Nicholas and Perenelle would share this ritual, the careful preparation of the elixir, perhaps in a special goblet reserved for this purpose, the silent acknowledgement of another year granted to them beyond natural limits. Did they ever question their choice? Did the weight of accumulated years and memories ever become a burden rather than a blessing? Historical accounts offer little insight into the private thoughts of this extraordinary couple. As the decades passed into centuries, the Flamels developed elaborate methods to conceal their unnaturally extended lives. They would periodically stage deaths and funerals, change their identities and appearances through magical means, and relocate to new communities where their faces were unknown. Yet they always maintained connections to certain trusted magical families who helped protect their secret and manage their affairs during these transitions. The magical community gradually became aware that Flamel had achieved the impossible. His name entered alchemical texts, not as a theoretical pioneer, but as the only known creator of a working Philosopher's Stone. This fame brought both respect and danger. Other alchemists sought his mentorship, while less scrupulous wizards coveted the stone itself. Flamel established a careful network of trusted colleagues with whom he shared certain aspects of his alchemical knowledge, though never the complete process for creating the stone. Among these was Albus Dumbledore, who in his younger years collaborated with Flamel on discovering the 12 uses of dragon's blood, a project that demonstrated Dumbledore's exceptional magical intellect and earned Flamel's lasting trust. The Flamels' extraordinary longevity allowed them to witness the evolution of wizarding society across 6 centuries, from the medieval period through the Renaissance, the formation of the International Statute of Secrecy, the Industrial Revolution, and into the modern era. They saw the establishment of formal magical education, the codification of ministry regulations, and countless shifts in magical theory and practice. Consider the perspective granted by such extensive life experience, watching magical discoveries that once seemed revolutionary become standard curriculum at Hogwarts, seeing fashions and philosophies rise and fall like tides, perhaps developing a patience and detachment that only centuries of observation could cultivate. Yet through it all, Nicholas and Perenelle remained devoted to each other, their partnership spanning a duration almost unimaginable to ordinary wizards. The Philosopher's Stone's power made it an object of intense desire throughout magical history. Countless attempts were made to replicate Flamel's achievement, with varying degrees of legitimacy and success. Most alchemists who claimed to have created the stone were eventually exposed as frauds when they failed to demonstrate the longevity that would have confirmed their success. During the late 20th century, as Lord Voldemort sought means to restore his physical form and achieve immortality, the Philosopher's Stone became a target of his ambition. Recognizing this threat, Albus Dumbledore convinced the Flamels to remove the stone from their home and place it under Hogwarts' protection, a decision that would ultimately lead to the stone's destruction. The elaborate protections established around the stone at Hogwarts revealed much about its importance and the magical community's determination to keep it from falling into dangerous hands. Each protection, from Sprout's Devil's Snare to McGonagall's chess set, from Flitwick's flying keys to Snape's logic puzzle, represented not merely a barrier, but a test of the qualities needed to use the stone responsibly: patience, strategic thinking, attention to detail, and logical reasoning. When Harry Potter prevented Voldemort from obtaining the stone in 1992, Dumbledore and the Flamels agreed that the danger posed by its continued existence outweighed its benefits. With the stone's destruction, Nicholas and Perenelle Flamel faced the prospect of natural death after nearly 6 centuries of extended life. Imagine the conversation between this extraordinary couple as they contemplated their final days. Historical accounts suggest they approached this transition with remarkable equanimity. To the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure, Dumbledore later related as their perspective. After witnessing so much of history, perhaps the Flamels viewed death not with fear, but with curiosity about what might lie beyond. The Flamels had sufficient elixir stored to set their affairs in order, approximately enough for 1 year of life. They used this time to distribute their considerable knowledge, ensuring that valuable alchemical discoveries would not be lost. Certain texts were bequeathed to magical libraries and institutions, while others, deemed too dangerous for general access, were protected with powerful enchantments and entrusted to selected guardians. Their personal possessions, accumulated over centuries of life, were distributed among friends, colleagues, and charitable foundations. Their Paris home, maintained under various magical concealments throughout the centuries, was transformed into a small museum of alchemical history, though its most significant artifacts were removed to secure locations. The precise date and circumstances of the Flamels' passing remain private, known only to their closest associates. It is believed they spent their final days in the original Paris home, where their extraordinary journey began, surrounded by the familiar tools of Nicholas's alchemical work and the comfortable simplicity they had maintained, despite their remarkable circumstances. The legacy of the Philosopher's Stone extends far beyond its creators. In alchemical circles, Flamel's achievement represents the pinnacle of the art, proof that the theoretical transmutation of matter and extension of life were indeed possible through sufficient understanding of magical principles. His methodical approach to documentation and experimentation established standards that influenced magical research in fields beyond alchemy. For the broader wizarding community, the stone stands as a symbol of both magical achievement and ethical complexity. Its creation demonstrated the extraordinary potential of magical research, yet its power raised profound questions about the natural limitations of life and the consequences of transcending them. In educational contexts, the story of the Philosopher's Stone offers valuable lessons about the responsibilities that accompany magical discovery. At Hogwarts, students learning about Flamel's work are encouraged to consider not only the technical brilliance of his achievement, but also the wisdom shown in his discreet use of the stone's power and his eventual acceptance of its destruction. The alchemical principles underlying the stone continue to influence other branches of magic. Certain healing potions incorporate techniques derived from Flamel's research, while protective enchantments may utilize the stone's principles of transformation and permanence. Advanced transfiguration theory at the Wizarding University level often includes study of alchemical transmutation as its historical foundation. As the candle flames flicker lower and the night grows deeper, our exploration of the Philosopher's Stone draws to a close. This legendary artifact, created through one wizard's extraordinary patience and insight, reminds us that magic's greatest achievements often lie not in spectacular displays of power, but in the subtle harmonizing of natural elements and principles. The soft embers in the hearth mirror the ruby glow that the stone itself might have cast, a gentle reminder of both its wonder and its impermanence. As sleep approaches, consider this question. If you possessed the knowledge to create your own Philosopher's Stone, would you choose the path of extended life? Or would you, like the Flamels in their final wisdom, recognize that even the most magical existence finds meaning in its natural conclusion? Chapter 6. The First Wizarding War. Darkness falls earlier on winter evenings, creeping across the landscape like an advancing shadow. Tonight, as wind whispers secrets through bare branches, let us turn to one of the most somber chapters in recent wizarding history, the First Wizarding War. A time when darkness threatened to extinguish the light, when neighbor turned against neighbor, and when the very foundations of magical society trembled beneath the growing power of a dark wizard whose name many still fear to speak. The origins of this conflict lie not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of ideologies, grievances, and ambitions that crystallized around a charismatic figure. Before he became Lord Voldemort, he was Tom Marvolo Riddle, a brilliant Hogwarts student whose handsome features and articulate manner concealed growing darkness within. Those who knew him during his school years speak of his uncanny ability to charm teachers and fellow students alike, to present himself as precisely what each person wanted to see. After leaving Hogwarts, Riddle disappeared from British Wizarding Society for nearly a decade. During these mysterious years, he traveled extensively, seeking out obscure and dangerous magical knowledge. Ancient temples in forgotten corners of the world, secret libraries hidden from mainstream magical society, practitioners of dark arts in remote mountain retreats. These were his classrooms now, far from the structured education of Hogwarts. When he returned to Britain in the early 1970s, Tom Riddle had transformed himself into Lord Voldemort. The handsome young man was gone, his features already beginning to show the unnatural alterations caused by his experiments with the darkest of magic. More significantly, he returned with a cohesive ideology and a group of followers, the first Death Eaters, bound to him by shared beliefs, intimidation, and powerful magical oaths. Picture the Britain of that era. A wizarding community that had enjoyed relative peace for decades, whose memories of Grindelwald's rise and fall were fading into historical accounts rather than lived experience. The Ministry of Magic, like many institutions during periods of extended stability, had grown somewhat complacent, focused on regulation and administration rather than defense against dark forces. Into this environment, Voldemort's early movements were subtle, whispered conversations in pure-blood households, quiet recruitment among those who felt marginalized by the Ministry's increasingly inclusive policies, promises of a return to traditional wizarding values. The most violent acts were initially attributed to random dark wizards rather than recognized as part of an organized movement. Gradually, a pattern emerged that could no longer be ignored. Muggle-born witches and wizards began to disappear. Magical families who openly opposed blood purity ideology suffered accidents. Ministry officials who advocated for Muggle protection found themselves under mysterious attacks. And above the scenes of the worst violence, a new symbol appeared in the night sky. The Dark Mark, a skull with the serpent protruding from its mouth like a tongue, casting an eerie green light over scenes of devastation below. The atmosphere of the wizarding community transformed as the conflict intensified. Enchanted coins and secret passwords became necessary for confirming the identities of colleagues and friends, as the imperious curse turned familiar faces into unwitting agents of the Dark Lord. Parents whispered protective spells over their children before sending them to school. Social gatherings became tense affairs where conversations were carefully monitored for any hint of political leanings. Diagon Alley, once a bustling center of magical commerce, grew quiet as shoppers conducted their business quickly and returned to the relative safety of their homes. Many shops boarded their windows or closed entirely. Gringotts strengthened its already formidable security. The Leaky Cauldron, traditionally a warm and welcoming establishment, became a place of hushed conversations and suspicious glances at unfamiliar patrons. As the Death Eaters grew in number and boldness, their attacks became more public and more terrible. The Dark Mark would appear over wizarding and Muggle homes alike, signaling atrocities within. Giants, recruited to Voldemort's cause, devastated entire villages in the countryside. In Fairy, corpses animated by dark magic were deployed as weapons of terror, their blank eyes and decaying forms bringing primal horror to those who encountered them. The Ministry of Magic, recognizing the existential threat, responded by granting Auror's emergency powers. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement, under the leadership of Bartemius Crouch Sr., authorized the use of unforgivable curses against suspected Death Eaters. The justice system, once meticulous in its procedures, adopted expedited processes that sometimes sacrificed careful consideration for rapid response. In this darkening world, Albus Dumbledore emerged as a crucial figure of resistance. Recognizing that the Ministry alone could not counter Voldemort's growing power, Dumbledore formed the Order of the Phoenix, a secret organization of witches and wizards committed to fighting the Dark Lord and his followers. Unlike the Ministry with its bureaucracy and public accountability, the Order could operate in shadows, gathering intelligence and striking quickly where needed. Imagine the first meeting of this extraordinary group, perhaps in a magically protected location. a circle of determined faces illuminated by wand light, people from diverse backgrounds united by a common purpose. Aurors who had grown frustrated with ministry limitations, healers who had treated too many victims of dark magic, ordinary witches and wizards, driven by extraordinary courage to stand against the gathering darkness. Among the Order's early members were some of the most talented wizards and witches of their generation, James and Lily Potter, exceptional in their magical abilities and unflinching in their opposition to blood purity ideology, Sirius Black, who rejected his family's pure-blood supremacist views to fight alongside his friends, Remus Lupin, whose condition as a werewolf gave him unique insights into the marginalized groups Voldemort sought to recruit, Frank and Alice Longbottom, Aurors whose strategic minds and dueling prowess made them particularly effective fighters. The Wizarding War unfolded across Britain like a shadow play, with much of the Muggle population entirely unaware of the magical conflict occurring alongside their ordinary lives. Yet Muggles, too, suffered casualties. Strange accidents, unexplained disasters, and mysterious disappearances filled Muggle newspapers, while the wizarding community recognized the telltale signs of Death Eater activity. As in any conflict, intelligence became a critical resource. Both sides sought to place spies within enemy ranks. The atmosphere of suspicion this created frayed the bonds of trust even among allies. Friends began to doubt friends, wondering if inexplicable behavior might indicate the Imperious Curse, or, worse, willing betrayal. Organizations compartmentalized information, telling members only what they needed to know for specific missions. One of the conflict's most troubling aspects was the involvement of creatures traditionally marginalized by wizarding society. Voldemort and his Death Eaters promised werewolves freedom from the restrictive legislation that made their lives so difficult. They offered giants territory and autonomy after centuries of being pushed to remote mountain regions. They assured vampires and hags places of respect in the new order they would create. While many resisted these overtures, others, worn down by generations of discrimination, saw the Dark Lord's rise as a potential path to improved status. The toll on the wizarding community was immense. Beyond the immediate casualties of violence, the war's psychological impact left deep scars. Magical families found themselves divided by political allegiances. Friendships dissolved over ideological differences or suspected loyalties. Children grew up in an atmosphere of fear, taught defensive spells alongside nursery rhymes. The carefree innocence that should accompany childhood was replaced by constant vigilance and wariness of strangers. As the conflict intensified, patterns of resistance emerged alongside patterns of terror. Some witches and wizards established safe houses for Muggle-borns fleeing persecution. Others developed communication networks to warn of Death Eater movements or impending attacks. Healers at St. Mungo's Hospital created specialized treatment protocols for victims of dark curses previously encountered only in ancient texts. The most harrowing battles often left little physical evidence, occurring as they did through magic rather than conventional weapons. A country lane might appear peaceful to Muggle eyes, mere hours after it had witnessed a magical confrontation that shattered reality itself. Ancient protective enchantments, some dating back centuries, were awakened to shield important magical sites from dark forces. By 1979, the wizarding world teetered on the edge of complete subjugation to Voldemort's forces. The Ministry had been infiltrated at multiple levels. Several prominent wizarding families had been entirely eliminated. Dementors, ancient guardians of Azkaban prison, abandoned their posts to join the Dark Lord, drawn by his promise of more souls to feed upon. The Order of the Phoenix, while still fighting valiantly, had suffered significant losses. It was in this desperate hour that a prophecy was made, words spoken by Sybil Trelawney during her interview with Albus Dumbledore at the Hog's Head Inn in Hogsmeade. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, though only partially overheard by a Death Eater spy, this prophecy would fundamentally alter the course of the war. Upon learning of this prediction, Lord Voldemort became fixated on eliminating the threat before it could materialize. Two families had members who fit the prophecy's description, the Potters and the Longbottoms. Both couples had directly confronted Voldemort 3 times, and both had sons born at the end of July 1980. Though Dumbledore arranged protection for both families, it was the Potters whom Voldemort ultimately decided to target first. The events of October 31st, 1981, have been recounted so often that they have taken on an almost mythic quality in wizarding culture. The betrayal by their secret keeper that revealed the Potters' location in Godric's Hollow, Voldemort's arrival, and James Potter's final, wandless attempt to delay the Dark Lord, while his wife and son might escape. Lily Potter's ultimate sacrifice, standing between her son and death, and then, the moment that ended the First Wizarding War, Voldemort's killing curse rebounding from the protected infant, destroying the Dark Lord's physical form, and leaving only a lightning-shaped scar on the forehead of young Harry Potter. The aftermath brought a complex mixture of jubilation, grief, and confusion to the wizarding world. Spontaneous celebrations erupted in magical communities, with witches and wizards taking extraordinary risks of Muggle exposure in their relief. Shooting stars over Kent, owls flying openly by daylight, people in colorful robes embracing in the streets. The magical community's emotional release after years of tension was as uncontainable as it was understandable. Yet amid the celebrations, the war's deeper wounds remained. Families mourned their dead. St. Mungo's continued to care for those injured physically and mentally by dark magic. The judicial system faced the monumental task of determining who had served Voldemort willingly and who had acted under magical compulsion. Some of the most disturbing violence actually occurred after Voldemort's fall, as desperate Death Eaters like Bellatrix Lestrange tortured Frank and Alice Longbottom to insanity, seeking information about their master's fate. The institutional response to Voldemort's defeat revealed much about wizarding society's strengths and weaknesses. The Ministry, eager to demonstrate control after years of destabilization, sometimes prioritized the appearance of justice over its substance. Sirius Black, wrongfully accused of betraying the Potters and murdering Peter Pettigrew, was sent to Azkaban without a trial, one of several miscarriages of justice that would have long-lasting consequences. For many who had fought against Voldemort, peace brought its own challenges. Aurors who had spent years in constant danger struggled to readjust to routine magical law enforcement. Members of the now disbanded Order of the Phoenix returned to ordinary lives, carrying extraordinary memories and traumas, and Albus Dumbledore, perhaps alone among wizardkind, harbored the troubling suspicion that Voldemort's defeat might be temporary rather than permanent. The physical reconstruction of wizarding Britain proceeded relatively quickly, magic allowing the repair of damaged structures and places. The emotional and social reconstruction proved far more difficult. Trust, once broken, could not be restored with a simple reparo spell. Families who had lost members to the conflict faced empty chairs at dinner tables that no magic could fill. Children orphaned by the war, like young Neville Longbottom, grew up with the living ghosts of what their parents had been before dark magic destroyed their minds. As years passed, and a new generation of witches and wizards grew up, knowing the war only through history books and family stories, certain aspects of the conflict became simplified in collective memory. Voldemort transformed from a complex threat, a wizard who had masterfully exploited existing social divisions and resentments, into a more straightforward embodiment of evil. The moral ambiguities of wartime actions, the difficult choices faced by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, faded into more comfortable narratives of heroes and villains. Yet within the quieter corners of wizarding society, some maintained vigilance. Certain members of the original order kept in contact through the years of peace. Alastor Mad-Eye Moody never relaxed his constant watchfulness, and Dumbledore, from his position as Hogwarts headmaster, carefully monitored signs and portents, preparing for a possibility that most of the wizarding world preferred to consider impossible, the return of Lord Voldemort. The First Wizarding War teaches us that peace is precious and fragile, that ideologies of supremacy and exclusion can transform into violence when given the right conditions and leadership, and that courage can emerge from the most unexpected sources. The ordinary witches and wizards who risked everything to hide Muggle-born friends, the Hogwarts students who passed information to the Resistance, the magical creatures who refused Voldemort's tempting offers and maintained their integrity despite centuries of mistreatment by wizardkind. The embers in our fire grow dim now, casting long shadows like memories across the floor. The First Wizarding War may have concluded on that Halloween night in Godric's Hollow, but its echoes would continue to shape magical Britain for decades to come. In Harry Potter, orphaned and marked, lay both the symbol of Voldemort's defeat and the seed of conflicts yet to come. As sleep approaches, and our exploration of this dark chapter draws to a close, consider this question. In a society divided by ideology and threatened by powerful dark forces, what would you risk to stand for what you believe is right, and how would you maintain your humanity in the face of inhumanity? Chapter 7. The Wisdom of Arthur Weasley. The warmest homes are not always the grandest, and the wisest souls not always those who speak the loudest. As moonlight filters through our window, casting gentle shadows across the floor, let us explore the life and character of a wizard whose quiet strength and unwavering principles formed the foundation of one of the wizarding world's most beloved families, Arthur Weasley. Away from the imposing manners of ancient pure-blood families and the corridors of ministry power, in a house that defies both gravity and conventional architecture, Arthur Weasley built a life centered on kindness, curiosity, and an unshakable moral compass. The Burrow, with its hodgepodge of rooms, appearing to have been added with little planning beyond immediate necessity, stands as a physical manifestation of its owner's practical approach to life, solving problems as they arise, prioritizing function over appearance, and making space for all who need shelter. Born into the ancient pure-blood Weasley family, Arthur carried the legacy of a lineage as old as the Malfoys or Blacks, yet with a fundamentally different relationship to that heritage. While the sacred 28 families like the Malfoys wore their bloodlines like crowns, the Weasleys, Arthur's family in particular, regarded their magical ancestry as mere circumstance rather than defining virtue. This perspective would shape Arthur's approach to both his professional and personal life, setting him apart in wizarding society. Picture Arthur in his youth at Hogwarts, a tall, thin boy with the trademark Weasley red hair, already wearing spectacles that would occasionally slip down his nose when he became excited about a new discovery. Sorted into Gryffindor, like generations of Weasleys before him, young Arthur displayed not the brash courage often associated with the house, but the quieter bravery of standing firm in one's convictions even when they prove unpopular. It was during these formative years that Arthur first encountered Molly Pruitt, a fellow Gryffindor whose fierce protective instincts and warm heart complemented his gentle nature. Their courtship unfolded against the backdrop of rising tensions in the wizarding world, as the ideology that would eventually fuel Voldemort's rise began to take hold in certain pure-blood circles. After completing his education, Arthur joined the Ministry of Magic, eventually finding his niche in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office. This small, underfunded department, tucked away in a corner of the ministry that more ambitious wizards avoided, became the perfect canvas for Arthur's particular passions and principles. Here, he could indulge his fascination with Muggle technology while simultaneously protecting non-magical people from potentially harmful enchanted objects. Imagine his cramped office, windowless and overflowing with confiscated items, singing tea kettles that scalded unwary users, biting pocket watches, vacuum cleaners with unusual appetites, parchment forms stacked precariously on every surface, documentation of incidents requiring investigation. And in the midst of this organized chaos, Arthur Weasley at his desk, perhaps disassembling an ordinary Muggle telephone, with the delighted concentration of an explorer uncovering the secrets of an ancient civilization. Arthur's fascination with Muggles and their technology transcended mere professional interest. Where many wizards regarded non-magical people with dismissive amusement at best, or contempt at worst, Arthur saw ingenuity and resilience. Electricity, fellitones, and rubber ducks might have confused him in their specific functions, but he recognized the creative problem-solving behind these inventions, the way Muggles had developed remarkable solutions to challenges that wizards addressed with magic. This genuine respect for Muggle achievement formed the foundation of Arthur's opposition to pure-blood supremacy. Unlike some who opposed Voldemort from a position of abstract moral principle, Arthur's resistance was deeply personal, rooted in his recognition of the humanity and worth of those whom Death Eaters would subjugate or destroy. His weathered copy of the Muggle Protection Act, a piece of legislation he championed despite political headwinds, bore the fingerprints of countless revisions and the coffee stains of late nights spent drafting language that might withstand pure-blood opposition. At home in the Burrow, Arthur and Molly created an environment where their 7 children absorbed these values through daily example rather than explicit instruction. The Weasley household operated on principles rarely articulated but consistently demonstrated: that people matter more than possessions, that integrity isn't negotiable, that family extends beyond blood relations to encompass all who need belonging. Evenings at the Weasley table painted a vivid picture of these priorities. Mismatched chairs drawn up to accommodate however many might arrive for dinner, conversations flowing freely between topics magical and mundane. Arthur at the head of the table, perhaps sharing his latest Muggle discovery with enthusiasm that overlooked the occasional eye-rolling from his children, his genuine wonder untarnished by their familiarity with his eccentricities. The financial constraints under which the Weasleys operated were no secret in wizarding society. Arthur's position at the ministry provided modest compensation, stretched thin across the needs of a large family. Second-hand robes, hand-me-down textbooks, and carefully budgeted Hogwarts supplies were realities that the Weasley children navigated with varying degrees of grace. Yet within these limitations, Arthur and Molly created abundance of a different sort, a home overflowing with affection, support, and the security of unconditional belonging. Arthur's relationship with money revealed much about his character and values. While he could have pursued more lucrative positions within the ministry, his magical competence and pure-blood status would have opened such doors. He chose work that aligned with his interests and principles, regardless of its prestige or compensation. This choice reflected not a lack of ambition, but rather a different conception of success, one measured in purpose and integrity rather than galleons or influence. This is not to suggest that Arthur was immune to the allure of greater resources. His excitement over winning the Daily Prophet Grand Prize galleon draw demonstrated very human delight in unexpected fortune. Yet characteristically, the Weasleys directed much of this windfall toward experiences that would enrich their family bonds, the trip to Egypt to visit their eldest son Bill, rather than material acquisitions that might have elevated their apparent status. Arthur's approach to parenting balanced gentle guidance with respect for his children's autonomy. From Bill's decision to work as a curse breaker in Egypt to Charlie's dragon-keeping in Romania, from the twins' entrepreneurial ambitions to Ron's friendship with the famous Harry Potter, Arthur supported his children's diverse paths while ensuring they understood the principles that should guide their choices. Perhaps nowhere was this balance more evident than in his complex relationship with Percy, whose ambition and temporary estrangement tested Arthur's patience but never his love. When darkness returned to the wizarding world with Voldemort's resurrection, Arthur's quiet courage transformed into active resistance. As a member of the reconstituted Order of the Phoenix, he placed himself and his family in the front lines against forces that viewed their blood traitor status with particular hatred. The night patrols guarding the Department of Mysteries, undertaken after full days of ministry work, demonstrated his willingness to sacrifice comfort and safety for the greater good. The attack Arthur suffered while on order duty, the terrible encounter with Nagani that nearly claimed his life, revealed both his vulnerability and his resilience. In the sterile environment of St. Mungo's Hospital, surrounded by the concerned faces of his family, Arthur maintained his essential optimism and curiosity. Even confined to a hospital bed, recovering from wounds inflicted by dark magic, he found fascination in the Muggle concept of stitches and appreciation for the healer's efforts. As the ministry fell increasingly under Voldemort's influence, Arthur's position became ever more precarious. His known association with the Order of the Phoenix, his friendship with Dumbledore, his family's connection to Harry Potter, and his fundamental opposition to pure-blood ideology marked him as a target. Yet he continued to navigate this dangerous landscape with characteristic integrity, working within the system where possible and resisting through underground channels where necessary. The transformation of the Burrow into a safe house for the Order represented Arthur's commitment to practical resistance. The home he had built for his family became a haven for others fighting the same battle, protected by layers of magical security, yet still retaining its essential warmth and welcome. Around the kitchen table where his children had grown up, Order members now gathered to exchange information and plan operations, the domestic setting a poignant contrast to the deadly serious conversations it hosted. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Arthur's character was his capacity to maintain his fundamental goodness and optimism in the face of darkness. The Wizarding Wars exposed him to cruelty, violence, and loss that might have embittered a less grounded soul. Yet Arthur emerged with his essential nature intact, still curious, still kind, still able to see the best in others and in the world around him. This preservation of spirit wasn't naivete or denial. Arthur understood all too well the realities of the conflict and the genuine evil embodied in Voldemort's ideology. Rather, it reflected a deliberate choice to hold fast to the values that gave meaning to the struggle, to fight not just against darkness but for the light, for a world where differences would be celebrated rather than weaponized. In the aftermath of the Second Wizarding War, Arthur's role in rebuilding magical society proved as significant as his wartime resistance. Elevated to head the Office for the Detection and Confiscation of Counterfeit Defensive Spells and Protective Objects, he brought his practical experience and ethical clarity to the critical task of addressing the magical exploitation that had flourished during the conflict. Later, as part of the reformed ministry under Kingsley Shacklebolt's leadership, Arthur helped shape policies designed to heal the divisions that had facilitated Voldemort's rise. The wisdom of Arthur Weasley lies not in grand philosophical pronouncements or revolutionary magical discoveries, but in the accumulated choices of a life lived with exceptional consistency. In his refusal to value status above substance, in his genuine interest in perspectives different from his own, in his recognition that courage comes in many forms, from facing deadly adversaries to acknowledging when one has made a mistake. This wisdom manifested in small moments that revealed profound truths. His gentle reminder to Molly that their daughter Ginny had 6 brothers watching out for her, demonstrating trust in both his son's protective instincts and his daughter's resilience. His handling of the enchanted car incident, balancing appropriate consequences with understanding of the circumstances that led to his son's reckless decision. His willingness to defend Lucius Malfoy's wife and son after the Battle of Hogwarts, recognizing that even those who had supported Voldemort contained complexities beyond their worst choices. As a patriarch, Arthur created a legacy not of wealth or political influence, but of children who carried his values into their diverse paths. Bill's work with goblins reflected Arthur's respect for magical beings, often marginalized by wizarding society. Charlie's dedication to protecting magical creatures echoed his father's commitment to safeguarding the vulnerable. Percy, even during his estrangement, demonstrated Arthur's belief in principled public service, though temporarily misdirected. The twins' inventive spirit channeled Arthur's fascination with how things work. Ron's loyal friendship and eventual career as an Auror carried forward his father's courage and integrity, and Ginny's fierce independence and talent honored the freedom Arthur had always encouraged in his children. In his later years, surrounded by grandchildren who knew him as the gentle grandfather who enchanted Muggle toys for their amusement and answered their endless questions with patient delight, Arthur Weasley embodied the rewards of a life well lived. The modest home he and Molly had built became the gathering place for a family expanded by marriage and new generations, the worn wooden table at its center, having witnessed the full cycle from young parents with small children to grandparents watching history repeat itself in the best possible way. The moonlight has shifted now as our exploration of Arthur Weasley's life draws to a close. The shadows have lengthened, but they cannot diminish the warmth that stories of the Burrow and its patriarch inspire. In a wizarding world often dazzled by exceptional magical power and dramatic heroism, Arthur reminds us that some of the most important magic happens in ordinary moments, in a father's encouraging word, in principles maintained despite cost, in curiosity that transcends the boundaries others accept without question. As sleep begins to gentle your thoughts, consider this. In what ways might Arthur Weasley's quiet wisdom, his ability to value people for who they are rather than what they possess, his genuine curiosity about perspectives different from his own, his courage to stand by his convictions even when they prove unpopular, offer guidance for navigating your own path through a complex world. Chapter 8. The Study of Ancient Runes. Stone speaks to those who know how to listen. Across the veil of centuries, ancient wizards and witches left messages carved in rock, etched in metal, and painted on cave walls, symbols of power that continue to resonate with magical energy long after their creators have passed into memory. Tonight, as the hour grows late and the world grows quiet, let us explore the mysterious and profound discipline of ancient runes, one of the most subtle and enduring forms of magic practiced in the wizarding world. Unlike the immediate satisfaction of a successfully cast charm, or the visible transformation achieved through transfiguration, the magic of runic symbols unfolds across time, drawing power from the precision of their carving and the intention of their creation. These ancient characters, angular and often severe in appearance, channel magical energy in ways that modern spellcasting with wands cannot always replicate, offering durability and complexities of effect that have ensured their continued relevance in contemporary magical practice. At Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the study of ancient runes stands as one of the elective subjects available to students from their third year onward. The classroom dedicated to this discipline might be found in one of the castle's older sections, perhaps with windows facing east to catch the morning light that best illuminates the subtle details of runic inscriptions. Picture walls lined with charts displaying different runic alphabets, glass cases containing artifacts bearing ancient symbols, and shelves of weathered texts whose spines bear titles in languages long since fallen from common usage. Professor Bathsheba Babbling, the instructor of this arcane subject during Harry Potter's time at Hogwarts, is rarely mentioned in accounts of school life, perhaps fittingly for a discipline that values patience and careful observation over flashy demonstrations. One might imagine her as a witch of scholarly demeanor, fingers permanently stained with the special inks used in runic transcription, her lectures punctuated by etymological detours that reveal the deep connections between language and magical power. The foundation of ancient runes as a magical discipline rests upon several runic alphabets developed by magical communities across Europe and beyond. The Elder Futhark, with its 24 angular characters developed by Nordic wizards of the 2nd to 8th centuries, forms the core of the beginner's curriculum at Hogwarts. Each rune in this alphabet carries both phonetic value and symbolic meaning, Fihu representing wealth and cattle, Uruz embodying strength and vitality, Thurisaz channeling protective yet dangerous forces, and so forth through the alphabet. For first-year students of the subject, much time is spent simply learning to recognize and accurately reproduce these symbols. The precision of a rune's form carries magical significance. A slightly misdrawn angle or an improperly proportioned line can fundamentally alter the magical effect or render the rune entirely inert. Students spend hours practicing with specialized brushes and charcoal, developing the steady hand and focused attention that runic magic demands. Beyond mere recognition comes the more complex understanding of how runes function within magical contexts. Unlike the Latin-derived incantations of modern spellwork, which channel a witch or wizard's magical intent through precise vocalization and wand movement, runes operate through a different magical principle. They embody a form of sympathetic magic, where the symbol itself contains an inherent connection to the force or concept it represents. The rune Kenaz, shaped like an angular C and associated with torchlight, contains within its very form the essence of illumination and revelation. The vocabulary of runic magic extends beyond the Elder Futhark to include the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, the Younger Futhark of Viking-era Scandinavia, and the medieval runes used by wizards through the Middle Ages. Advanced students might also study the Marcomannic runes developed by Germanic magical communities, or even certain Eastern European variants that incorporated elements from Cyrillic alphabets into their magical writing systems. The practical applications of runic magic are as diverse as they are powerful. Consider the ancient standing stones found throughout Britain, many of which were erected or enhanced by early wizarding communities. To Muggle eyes, these appear as merely impressive monuments to prehistoric engineering, but the trained runic scholar can discern the faint etchings of protective symbols that have maintained magical boundaries for millennia, separating magical locations from Muggle awareness through subtle but persistent enchantment. Household protections often incorporate runic elements for their stability and durability. A threshold stone carved with the rune Algiz, resembling an upward-pointing arrow with angled side branches, creates a persistent ward against malevolent forces that requires no renewal or maintenance once properly established. Family homes in older wizarding villages might bear generations of layered runic protections, each adding to the magical security of the dwelling. The creation of magical objects frequently involves runic inscription to stabilize and direct the enchantments placed upon them. The inner workings of a time-turner, those rare and dangerous devices that manipulate temporal flow, incorporate minute runic sequences that help contain and channel the extraordinarily powerful magic required to affect time itself. The goblin-made weapons so prized in wizarding culture often bear runic inscriptions invisible to the casual observer, detectable only to those with training in recognizing magic worked into metal at the moment of forging. Perhaps the most dramatic application of runic magic comes in the form of curse-breaking, the dangerous and complex work performed by wizards like Bill Weasley for Gringotts Bank. Ancient tombs and magical repositories are frequently protected by layered runic curses that must be methodically deciphered and neutralized. Picture a dimly lit burial chamber deep beneath Egyptian sands, where a lone curse-breaker kneels before a sealed doorway, carefully tracing with his fingertips the sequence of runes that, if misinterpreted, might trigger defensive magic unchanged in potency since the days of the pharaohs. The translation of ancient runic texts constitutes another vital application of this field of study. The wizarding libraries of Europe contain scrolls and codices whose runic content has yet to be fully deciphered, potentially holding forgotten spells, historical accounts, or magical theories that could expand contemporary understanding of magic itself. The Department of Mysteries is rumored to maintain a specialized division dedicated solely to the translation and analysis of runic texts recovered from magical sites throughout the world. For the serious student of ancient runes, the Hogwarts curriculum progresses from basic recognition and reproduction through translation exercises and theoretical understanding of runic principles, culminating in practical applications during new T-level study. Seventh-year students might undertake projects creating their own runic-enhanced objects, designing protective boundaries using runic sequences, or conducting research into obscure runic systems from non-European magical traditions. The intersection of ancient runes with other magical disciplines creates particularly fascinating areas of specialized study. Combined with arithmancy, runic magic can create predictive systems of remarkable accuracy, though the calculations involved become exponentially complex. When applied to potion making, certain runic symbols etched into cauldron rims can stabilize volatile ingredients or enhance specific properties of the brewing mixture. Even herbology benefits from runic knowledge, as certain plants respond to magical energies channeled through appropriate symbols placed within their growing environment. The historical development of runic magic reveals much about the evolution of wizarding society itself. The earliest known runic inscriptions created by magical practitioners date back to approximately the 1st century, though evidence suggests that similar symbolic magic systems existed in even earlier periods. As wizarding communities across Europe developed different approaches to magical theory and practice, their runic systems evolved accordingly, sometimes diverging dramatically from their common origins. During the Roman expansion across Europe, the interaction between Mediterranean magical traditions and Northern European runic practices created fascinating hybrid forms of magical writing. Some wizarding historians argue that this period saw the first systematic attempts to combine the immediate power of incantation-based magic with the enduring strength of runic enchantment, laying the theoretical groundwork for modern comprehensive magical education. The medieval period witnessed both the height of runic sophistication and the beginning of its decline as a primary magical system. The establishment of formal wizarding schools coincided with the standardization of wand-based spellcasting, which offered greater versatility and accessibility than the more painstaking runic approaches. Yet even as runic magic receded from everyday usage, its importance for certain specialized applications ensured its continued study and preservation. By the time Hogwarts formalized its curriculum in the early medieval period, ancient runes had already transitioned from a core magical practice to a specialized field of study. The 4 founders, recognizing the historical and practical significance of runic knowledge, established it as part of the school's offerings, though accounts suggest they debated its placement within the educational structure. Rowena Ravenclaw apparently advocated for its inclusion as a mandatory subject, while Salazar Slytherin preferred to restrict such knowledge to students of particular aptitude and background. The study of ancient runes requires certain qualities of mind and character that make it particularly suited to certain types of students. Patience, precision, and methodical thinking serve the runic scholar well, as does a deep appreciation for history and the evolution of magical theory. Those who find immediate results rewarding might struggle with the deliberate pace of runic work, while students who appreciate subtle and enduring effects often excel in the discipline. Among the notable historical figures in the field of runic studies, Laurentia Fletwalk stands as perhaps the most significant contributor to modern understanding. Her 15th-century work, Ruins of Runes, a comprehensive analysis of deteriorated magical inscriptions, established methods for reconstructing damaged runic sequences that remain in use by cursebreakers and magical archaeologists to this day. Fletwalk's careful documentation of runic sites throughout Britain and Scandinavia preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to time and neglect. In the contemporary wizarding world, interest in ancient runes has experienced something of a renaissance, particularly following the Second Wizarding War. The destruction of many magical artifacts and locations during that conflict highlighted the importance of preserving magical knowledge in its most durable forms. Modern runic scholars have begun exploring applications combining traditional runic principles with recent magical innovations, creating protective systems that incorporate the stability of ancient methods with the flexibility of contemporary spellwork. For the average witch or wizard who did not pursue runic studies at Hogwarts, encounters with this ancient magical system might be limited to observing the symbols on commemorative monuments, noticing the inscriptions on certain galleons minted during goblin-wizard cooperation periods, or perhaps discovering the faded protective runes carved into the foundation stones of an inherited wizarding property. Yet even this peripheral awareness connects modern magical practitioners to their distant ancestors, who channeled their magical abilities through careful symbol-making rather than the refined wand techniques of today. The emotional and psychological dimensions of runic magic deserve particular consideration. Unlike the immediate magical expression of spellcasting, which channels the practitioner's intent in the moment, runic work requires a sustained focus and clarity of purpose that develops different aspects of magical aptitude. The rune carver learns to extend their magical intent across time, to create enchantments that will continue to express their purpose long after the initial act of creation is complete, a discipline that cultivates patience and perspective, often lacking in more immediate forms of magic. Perhaps this temporal aspect of runic magic explains its enduring appeal to certain types of magical thinkers. There is something profoundly moving about creating magic intended to last beyond one's own lifetime, to carve symbols that might still channel protective energy around a family home centuries after the carver's passing, or to contribute to magical knowledge that will be studied by students not yet born. In this sense, runic magic connects the practitioner not only to the past traditions from which the symbols derive, but also to the future generations who will encounter their work. The classroom at Hogwarts, where young witches and wizards first encounter these ancient symbols, thus serves as a nexus point between past and future, a place where knowledge preserved through centuries finds new life in the minds of those who will carry it forward. The student who carefully traces their first tentative rune joins a lineage stretching back to the earliest days of organized magical practice, becoming part of a tradition that predates Hogwarts itself. As our exploration of ancient runes draws to a close, imagine a single rune carved into weathered stone, Dagaz, the rune of daybreak and transformative change, shaped like an hourglass turned on its side. In this simple symbol lies encoded a profound magical understanding that endings and beginnings are interconnected, that darkness gives way to light in an eternal cycle, that change itself is the only constant in both magic and life. The ancient wizards who first developed this symbol recognized these truths, as did the generations of magical practitioners who preserved and transmitted this knowledge across centuries. The soft light in our room grows dimmer now, shadows deepening as sleep approaches. Yet in the gentle darkness, perhaps you might see with your mind's eye the faint luminous outlines of protective runes surrounding you, symbols of security and peaceful rest drawn by unseen hands across the threshold of dreams. As consciousness begins to fade, consider this question: if you could encode a single intention into a runic symbol designed to last through centuries, what lasting magic would you choose to leave as your mark upon the world? Chapter 9. The comforts of the Burrow. Some places in this world hold magic beyond spells and enchantments, a magic born of love, laughter, and the gradual accumulation of memories. As evening settles around us, and the first stars appear in the darkening sky, let us journey to a most extraordinary wizarding home, one that defies both architectural convention and gravity itself, the beloved dwelling known simply as the Burrow, on the outskirts of Ottery St. Catchpole, a small village in Devon, stands what appears to Muggle eyes on the rare occasions when they might glimpse it through various concealment charms as a dilapidated stone pigpen. But to those with magical sight, the true Burrow reveals itself, a ramshackle, multi-storied home that seems to have been built with little planning beyond immediate necessity, held together as much by magic as by conventional structure. The original stone building, likely a modest farmhouse when first constructed, has been augmented over decades with additional rooms that jut outward at precarious angles, connected by staircases that twist and turn with little regard for architectural logic. The overall effect is of a dwelling that has grown organically to accommodate an expanding family, each addition solving an immediate need rather than following any grand design. Picture yourself approaching this remarkable home for the first time, perhaps on a summer evening when golden light spills from its many mismatched windows. The front yard might appear somewhat chaotic, Wellington boots scattered near the door, several fat brown chickens pecking their way across the grass, perhaps a rusted cauldron or two repurposed as garden planters. A wooden sign reading "The Burrow welcomes visitors," though it leans slightly as if the very ground beneath it is reluctant to enforce straight lines in the vicinity of this whimsical structure. The heart of the Burrow is undoubtedly its kitchen, a warm, cluttered space dominated by a large wooden table, scrubbed smooth by years of family meals. The walls are lined with cupboards of mismatched sizes and colors, testament to gradual acquisition rather than coordinated purchase. Copper pots and pans hang from the ceiling, occasionally adjusting their positions seemingly of their own accord. The large fireplace serves for both cooking and Flu Network transportation, its mantelpiece crowded with an eclectic collection of wizard photographs, small magical objects, and the everyday detritus of family life. Above the perpetually bubbling pots on the stove hangs Molly Weasley's enchanted clock, perhaps the most remarkable timepiece in the wizarding world. Rather than showing hours and minutes, its single hand points to various locations: home, school, work, traveling, lost, hospital, prison, and most ominously, mortal peril. During peaceful times, the hand generally points to the more mundane locations, but during the darker days of the Second Wizarding War, visitors might have noticed the distressing sight of all hands fixed permanently on mortal peril, a constant reminder of the dangers facing this remarkable family. The Burrow's living room continues the theme of comfortable clutter, sofas and armchairs arranged for conversation rather than show, magical wireless radio on a side table, perhaps a chess set mid-game on a footstool. Bookshelves contain an eclectic mix of magical texts, from Mrs. Weasley's collection of Gilderoy Lockhart's works, before his fraudulent nature was exposed to Mr. Weasley's cherished Muggle studies, references like the everyday wonder of electricity. Knitting needles might be seen working independently in a corner, creating another of the famous Weasley sweaters that have become a Christmas tradition. Ascending the Burrow's crooked staircase reveals the many bedrooms added over the years to accommodate the 7 Weasley children. Each room reflects the personality of its occupant. Bill's, the eldest, might contain artifacts from his curse-breaking work in Egypt. Charlie's shows his passion for dragons in numerous books and models. Percy's is meticulously organized with ministry pamphlets stacked in precise order. The twins' room, belonging to Fred and George, deserves special mention for its role as the unofficial laboratory where many Weasley's Wizard Wheezes products were first conceived and tested, often with explosive results. Scorch marks on the ceiling bear testament to experiments gone awry, while hidden compartments, some known only to the twins themselves, conceal prototypes and ingredients that Mrs. Weasley would certainly have confiscated had she discovered them. Ron's bedroom near the attic is famously decorated in the vibrant orange of his beloved Chudley Cannon's Quidditch team, the color so bright it makes the walls appear to glow. Posters of players zoom across their frames, occasionally pausing to wave at visitors. The ghoul that resides in the attic above contributes to the home's unique character with its occasional moaning and pipe banging, particularly during nighttime hours. Ginny's room, though the smallest, reflects the strong personality of the only Weasley daughter. Holyhead Harpy's Quidditch posters share wall space with photographs of friends from Hogwarts. Being the youngest and the only girl among so many brothers required a certain resilience that is evident in even the arrangement of her personal space, practical, determined, yet with touches of whimsy that reveal her vivacious spirit. The garden surrounding the Burrow exists in a perpetual state between cultivation and wilderness. Gnarled trees provide shade for the weathered garden bench, while flower beds compete with determined gnomes for territory. These magical pests, potato-headed creatures about a foot tall, require regular denoming, a somewhat comical process involving spinning the creatures until dizzy and tossing them beyond the garden walls. They invariably return within days, considering the garden as much their home as the Weasleys do. Beyond the main garden stretches a small apple orchard that has, for generations, served as an improvised Quidditch pitch for the Weasley children. The trees, spaced just irregularly enough to provide a challenging obstacle course, have witnessed countless family matches. Many summer evenings have found the Weasleys and their guests mounted on an assortment of brooms, from Charlie's old shooting star to hand-me-down clean sweeps, tossing apples as makeshift quaffles and dodging around branches that serve as natural bludgers. What makes the Burrow truly extraordinary is not its physical structure, but the magical atmosphere created by the family who calls it home. Every corner contains evidence of lives fully lived, Magical photographs capturing birthdays and achievements, scuffed marks on walls, recording children's growth, worn spots on stair treads from years of running feet. Unlike the cold grandeur of mansions like Malfoy Manor, the Burrow exudes warmth, welcome, and genuine joy. The magic sustaining the Burrow goes beyond the conventional charms and spells maintaining its precarious structure. Self-washing dishes in the kitchen sink, self-knitting needles by the fireside, and enchanted appliances adapted from Muggle originals, often tinkered with by Arthur Weasley, create an environment where magic serves practical daily needs rather than mere ostentation. Mrs. Weasley's wand might be seen conducting a symphony of household tasks, vegetables chopping themselves for dinner, while laundry folds itself in neat piles, and a broom sweeps without assistance. For Harry Potter, whose first 11 years were spent in the sterile environment of the Dursleys' home, the Burrow represented a revelation of what family life could be. The contrast could hardly be more stark, from Privet Drive's rigid conformity and emotional coldness to the Burrow's chaotic warmth and unconditional acceptance. Harry's first visit during the summer before his second year at Hogwarts introduced him to a home where magic enhanced rather than replaced the essential elements of family life. Shared meals, gentle teasing, occasional squabbles, and genuine care. Throughout the series of events that would eventually culminate in the Second Wizarding War, the Burrow served as more than mere shelter. It became a sanctuary for those fighting against Voldemort's return, a gathering place for the Order of the Phoenix, and a symbol of what they were fighting to protect. The right of families, magical and Muggle alike, to live in peace and according to their own values. The defensive enchantments placed around the Burrow during these dangerous times reflected the increased importance of this seemingly humble dwelling. What had been simple, Muggle-repelling charms were augmented with the most powerful protective spells known to wizard kind. Disillusionment charms, intruder charms, and eventually a Fidelius charm that rendered the home completely invisible except to those specifically entrusted with its location. Even in the darkest days, when the Weasleys were forced to abandon their home due to their known association with Harry Potter, the Burrow's essence remained undiminished. The physical structure might stand empty, but the bonds formed within its walls and the values it represented continued to sustain its former occupants wherever they found themselves. Perhaps the most poignant moments at the Burrow came during celebrations that punctuated the more difficult periods. Bill and Fleur's wedding in the garden, Christmas gatherings that brought together friends and family despite growing external dangers, or simply Sunday dinners where Mrs. Weasley's cooking brought comfort that transcended the mere satisfaction of hunger. The table in the Burrow's kitchen witnessed conversations that changed the course of wizarding history, strategies discussed, information shared, and relationships formed that would eventually contribute to Voldemort's final defeat. Yet it also hosted countless ordinary moments that gave meaning to the larger struggle: breakfast conversations about school assignments, arguments over Quidditch teams, and the gentle bickering that characterizes all close families. What might we learn from the Burrow about the nature of home and belonging? In a world where magical ability might create palaces with a flick of a wand, the Weasleys chose a different path, allowing their home to evolve organically as their family grew, valuing function over appearance, and creating spaces meant for living rather than impressing. The result was a dwelling that perfectly reflected and nurtured those who inhabited it. For children raised within its crooked walls, the Burrow provided both security and freedom, a safe base from which to explore the wider world, confident in the knowledge that, whatever challenges they might face, this place and the people within it would remain constant. Each Weasley child ventured forth in a different direction, from Bill's curse-breaking in Egypt to Charlie's dragon-taming in Romania, from Percy's ministry ambitions to the twins' entrepreneurial innovations, yet all carried within them the values instilled in that remarkable home. After the Battle of Hogwarts, with Voldemort defeated and peace restored to the wizarding world, the Burrow continued its role as the gravitational center of an expanding Weasley universe. As children married and grandchildren began to appear, the home adapted once again, perhaps with a magically expanded dining table to accommodate more place settings, or additional chairs appearing by the fireside for holiday gatherings. One might imagine future generations of magical children experiencing the Burrow's unique charms, being warned about the ghoul in the attic, learning to de-gnome the garden under the watchful eye of their grandparents, discovering hidden treasures from Uncle George's shop in forgotten corners, and absorbing through osmosis the essential lesson that people matter more than possessions, that integrity isn't negotiable, and that home is defined by love rather than luxury. The gentle light of evening fades now into the deeper blue of night, stars appearing like distant windows in the velvet darkness. Our exploration of the Burrow draws to a close, but the warmth of this extraordinary home lingers in the imagination. In a world where magic can create spectacular wonders and terrible dangers, there is perhaps no magic more powerful than that which transforms a house into a home, a collection of individuals into a family. As sleep approaches, and your thoughts drift toward dreams, consider this question. What elements of the Burrow would you incorporate into your own ideal home, magical or otherwise? And what would this reveal about the values you hold most dear in creating a place of true belonging? Chapter 10. The Mirror of Erised and Its Reflections. Desire is perhaps the most powerful force that moves through human hearts, magical or muggle. As the night deepens around us and shadows grow long, let us turn our attention to one of the most mysterious and dangerous magical artifacts ever created, a mirror that shows neither your face nor your surroundings, but rather the deepest, most desperate desires of your heart. Welcome to the story of the Mirror of Erised. In an abandoned classroom at Hogwarts during the winter of 1991, young Harry Potter discovered something that would provide both wonder and wisdom. Standing alone in the darkness was a magnificent mirror, as high as the ceiling, with an ornate gold frame and standing on two clawed feet. Inscribed across the top in an unfamiliar language were the words, Erised, Stra, Eru, Oit, Ub, Kafru, Oit, Anwosi. When read backward, as is often the case with magical inscriptions designed to conceal their true meaning, the message reveals itself. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. The origins of this extraordinary artifact remain shrouded in mystery. Some magical historians attribute its creation to the legendary enchantress Morgan Le Fay in the early medieval period, while others suggest it may be even older, perhaps dating to ancient Roman wizardry, when divination mirrors were crafted to reveal possible futures. Unlike those prophetic devices, however, the Mirror of Erised does not show what might be, but rather what the viewer already carries within, their deepest longings made manifest in reflection. Picture the mirror standing in silent magnificence, its surface not quite like ordinary glass. When viewed from an angle, it might seem to contain swirling mist constantly in motion, until someone stands directly before it. Then, with dreamlike clarity, images form, not of the room behind the viewer, but of scenarios that have never existed, except in the most private chambers of the heart. For young Harry Potter, orphaned as an infant and raised without love by the Dursley family, what appeared in the mirror was heartbreakingly simple: his family. Standing beside his reflection were his parents, Lily and James Potter, along with grandparents and perhaps other relatives he had never known. They smiled and waved at him, his mother's hand resting on his shoulder, though he could feel nothing when he reached up to touch his own shoulder in response. The magic of the Mirror of Erised lies in its perfect understanding of each viewer's innermost desires, even those not consciously acknowledged. For Ron Weasley, who had grown up in the shadow of his accomplished older brothers, the mirror showed him standing alone, a head boy's badge gleaming on his chest, Quidditch captain's insignia alongside it, holding the house cup, achievements that would finally distinguish him as an individual rather than simply another Weasley son. The enchantment of the mirror transcends simple wish fulfillment. It reveals underlying motivations and needs with uncanny precision. A person might see themselves surrounded by gold and believe their desire is for wealth, when the mirror has sensed their true longing for the security and respect they associate with affluence. Another might see themselves in robust health when their surface desire is to recover from illness, but their deeper yearning is for the freedom and possibilities that health would provide. Albus Dumbledore, in his wisdom, explained to Harry the mirror's most dangerous quality, that it provides neither knowledge nor truth, only the most perfect and most desperate dream of the human soul. Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they have seen, or been driven mad, not knowing if what the mirror shows is possible, or even real. The magic preys upon the very human tendency to dwell in fantasy, rather than engage with the complexities and disappointments of reality. In Dumbledore's own words, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. This simple statement encapsulates the mirror's profound danger, not that it shows something terrible, but rather that it shows something so perfectly desirable that reality pales in comparison. The longer one gazes into its depths, the harder it becomes to pull away, to return to a world that suddenly seems dull and unsatisfying. What makes the Mirror of Erised particularly fascinating is its honesty. Unlike many dark magical objects that deceive or manipulate, the mirror shows something genuinely true, the authentic desires of the viewer's heart. The danger lies not in deception but in revelation, in confronting longings so fundamental that they can consume a person's attention entirely. It offers no path to achieving these desires, only endless contemplation of what might have been or might yet be. The chamber where Harry discovered the mirror, a disused classroom with desks and chairs pushed against the walls, gathering dust, suggests something about how wizarding society regards such powerful artifacts. Rather than destroying objects of potential danger, the magical world often simply sets them aside, removed from everyday encounter, but preserved for their historical or magical significance. One wonders how many other classrooms and forgotten corners of Hogwarts might contain similarly remarkable items, waiting to be discovered by wandering students. Dumbledore revealed to Harry that the mirror would be moved to a new location, and indeed, it later played a crucial role in protecting the Philosopher's Stone. In perhaps its most ingenious application, the mirror was enchanted to release the stone only to someone who wanted to find it but not use it, a paradoxical desire that frustrated Voldemort's attempts to obtain the stone through Professor Quirrell. This adaptation of the mirror's inherent magic demonstrated Dumbledore's profound understanding of both the artifact's capabilities and the nature of desire itself. The question of what Dumbledore himself saw when he looked into the mirror invites fascinating speculation. When Harry asked directly, Dumbledore claimed to see himself holding a pair of thick woolen socks, offering the explanation that people insist on giving him books for Christmas, when what he truly desires is warm footwear. This light-hearted deflection, while drawing a smile, clearly concealed a much more personal truth. Based on what we later learn of Dumbledore's troubled history, his sister Ariana's death, his complex relationship with Gellert Grindelwald, the guilt he carried through decades, one might suspect he saw his family whole again, perhaps his sister alive and well, and the terrible mistakes of his youth somehow undone. Such a vision would indeed be too private and painful to share with a student, no matter how special that student might be. The magical principles underlying the Mirror of Erised represent extraordinarily sophisticated enchantment. Unlike a simple charm that might reveal hidden things, or a curse that induces hallucinations, the mirror performs something akin to legilimency, the magical art of navigating the many layers of the mind. Yet it goes beyond accessing thoughts, to touching the realm of emotions and unconscious yearnings, areas that even the most skilled legilimens might find difficult to penetrate. Some magical theorists have suggested that the mirror contains elements of both divinatory magic in its ability to reveal hidden truths, and portal magic in creating what appears to be a window to another reality. The craftsmanship required to create such an object would have demanded not only exceptional magical skill, but also profound psychological insight, raising intriguing questions about its creator's identity and motivation. After its role in protecting the Philosopher's Stone, the mirror's fate remains unknown in official accounts. Some speculate it was returned to storage within Hogwarts, perhaps in the Room of Requirement where many hidden things reside. Others suggest it might have been relocated to the Department of Mysteries, where magical objects of exceptional power and unclear categorization are studied by unspeakables. Given its dangerous allure, it seems unlikely it would be displayed publicly or made accessible to casual discovery again. The Mirror of Erised serves as more than a plot device in the story of Harry Potter. It offers a powerful metaphor for human psychology. How many of us become trapped by visions of what might have been, or fantasies of what could be, at the expense of engaging with the present moment? The mirror's magic merely makes visible and immediate what many experience as internal preoccupation, the endless replay of scenarios that exist only in imagination. For Harry, whose encounter with the mirror occurred at a formative stage in his development, the experience provided valuable insight into his own emotional needs. The boy who had grown up without family discovered the depth of his longing for connection to his roots, for the parental love he had been denied. Yet Dumbledore's intervention helped ensure that this discovery became a moment of self-knowledge rather than a pattern of self-destructive obsession. In contrast, consider how the mirror might affect someone like Voldemort, whose desires centered on power, immortality, and domination. Would the mirror show him ruling over a subjugated wizarding world, immortal and invincible, or might it reveal something deeper and more surprising, perhaps a vision of himself whole again, his fragmented soul restored, the humanity he had systematically destroyed somehow reclaimed? We can only speculate, as Voldemort's direct encounter with the mirror occurred while he was parasitically attached to Quirrell, complicating any interpretation of what he might have seen independently. The linguistic play in the mirror's name and inscription, Erised being desire spelled backward, suggests something important about how the object functions. It reverses not just the word but the concept, transforming internal invisible longing into external visible imagery. This reversal operates on multiple levels, turning the traditionally reflective function of a mirror inside out, making it show not what is physically present, but what is emotionally absent. Beyond individual encounters, the Mirror of Erised raises fascinating questions about the nature of desire itself. Are our deepest yearnings fixed and unchanging, or do they evolve as we grow and experience life? Would a person seeing the same mirror at different points in their journey see different visions? The magical mechanics of the artifact suggest it responds to the viewer's current psychological state, potentially revealing how desires transform over time. For some, the mirror might show something seemingly attainable: academic success, professional recognition, romantic connection, while for others, it reveals the impossible: lost loved ones restored, time reversed, fate altered. This spectrum from achievable to impossible highlights the poignancy of desire itself, which pays little regard to possibility, focusing instead on need, on the heart's insistent voice saying, "This would complete me." The literature of magical artifacts includes many objects that grant wishes or fulfill desires, from legendary items like the Ring of Solomon to folklore staples like the monkey's paw. What distinguishes the Mirror of Erised is passivity. It offers vision without action, revelation without fulfillment. In this sense, it may be both less dangerous than wish-granting objects, which often bring unintended consequences, and more dangerous in its capacity to trap the viewer in endless contemplation of what cannot be. The concept of a mirror that reveals inner truth rather than physical appearance appears in various cultural traditions. In East Asian folklore, magical mirrors that reveal a person's true nature, often exposing demons disguised as humans, feature prominently. Western fairy tales include mirrors that answer questions honestly. Most famously in Snow White, the Mirror of Erised synthesizes these traditions into something uniquely profound, a reflection not of truth universally defined, but of truth personally experienced as desire. What might various notable wizarding figures see in the mirror? Imagine Minerva McGonagall, perhaps glimpsing herself in a world where the First Wizarding War never occurred, her former students all alive and flourishing. Severus Snape would almost certainly see Lily Evans, perhaps in a vision where he had made different choices and never lost her friendship or, in his deepest heart, her love. Remus Lupin might see himself free of lycanthropy, while Neville Longbottom could witness his parents whole and well, proud of the man he had become. The mirror invites not just speculation about fictional characters, but self-reflection from us as readers and listeners. What would each of us see if we stood before that ornate golden frame? Would we have the wisdom to recognize the vision as something to be understood rather than pursued? Or would we, like so many before, risk wasting away before it, lost in contemplation of what cannot be? As our exploration of this remarkable magical artifact draws to a close, the philosophical dimensions of the Mirror of Erised come into sharper focus. Beyond its specific magical properties, the mirror serves as a powerful reminder that self-knowledge, understanding what we truly desire beneath surface wants, is among life's most valuable and dangerous achievements. To know what would fulfill us is to understand what drives us, but becoming fixated on unfulfillable desires leads to a half-lived life, forever looking backward or forward rather than engaging with the present. Dumbledore, in his wisdom, helped Harry navigate this dangerous territory. He allowed the boy to discover for himself what the mirror revealed, but intervened before fascination could become obsession. In this, perhaps, lies the most important lesson about powerful magic and self-knowledge alike. We need guides who can help us integrate revelations into our lives without being consumed by them. The night grows deeper now, and the fire burns lower. As your thoughts drift towards sleep, perhaps you'll find yourself contemplating that magnificent mirror standing in darkness, waiting patiently for the next person to discover its power. If you were to stand before it at this moment in your life, what might you see reflected in its mysterious depths? And more importantly, what would that vision reveal about the desires that guide your choices, conscious or unconscious, as you move through your own unique story? Chapter 11. The Rise of the Death Eaters. The darkest shadows are often cast by the brightest lights. As our fire burns low and the hour grows late, we turn to a chapter of wizarding history that many would prefer to forget: the formation and rise of Lord Voldemort's followers, those who called themselves Death Eaters. In their wake, they left fear, destruction, and profound questions about the nature of power and the seductive allure of darkness. The story begins not with armies or dramatic declarations of war, but with quiet conversations in secluded corners of Hogwarts Castle. A handsome, charismatic student named Tom Riddle, whose brilliance and charm captivated both peers and professors, began gathering around himself a circle of devoted followers. Some were drawn to his extraordinary magical abilities, others to his articulation of pure-blood ideology, and still others simply to the aura of power that seemed to emanate from him like a palpable force. These first followers, students primarily from Slytherin House, though not exclusively, did not yet call themselves Death Eaters. They were known then as simply Riddle's Gang or Riddle's Friends, terms that masked the increasingly dark nature of their association. In quiet conversations away from professors' ears, Riddle shared his vision of magical superiority, of power, unrestrained by what he viewed as the arbitrary limitations imposed by conventional morality and ministry regulation. After leaving Hogwarts, Tom Riddle disappeared from British Wizarding Society for nearly a decade. During this mysterious period, he traveled widely, seeking out the darkest forms of magic and transforming himself both physically and spiritually into the being who would emerge as Lord Voldemort. His early followers dispersed temporarily, some entering influential positions within the Ministry of Magic, others establishing themselves in business or academia, maintaining loose connections while awaiting their leader's return. When Voldemort reappeared in Britain in the early 1970s, he began reconnecting with his former associates, now adults with their own resources and connections. The transformation in his appearance, the once handsome features now beginning to show a reptilian quality, The dark aura around him intensified, shocked even those who had known him before. Yet his charisma remained, perhaps even enhanced by the palpable sense of dark power he now embodied. It was during this period that the name Death Eaters first emerged. The term itself reveals much about Voldemort's evolving philosophy, the implication that his followers had transcended the ordinary wizard's fear of death, that they consumed or mastered it rather than being subject to it. The name carried echoes of ancient dark magic cults and created a mystique that helped recruit those drawn to secret knowledge and forbidden power. The distinctive physical mark of Death Eater membership, the dark mark burned into the left forearm of each follower, represented a magical innovation that revealed much about both Voldemort's power and his approach to leadership. This was no mere tattoo but a complex magical bond, allowing Voldemort to summon his followers instantly by touching his own mark, causing theirs to burn in response. The symbol itself, a skull with a serpent protruding from its mouth, combined imagery of death with Voldemort's connection to Salazar Slytherin's legacy. Imagine the moment of receiving such a mark, kneeling before the Dark Lord in a shadowy location, surrounded by masked witnesses, extending one's arm for the irreversible commitment. The pain as the mark burned into flesh and magic, becoming part of the recipient's very being. This ritual simultaneously conferred belonging and bondage, marking the recipient as special while ensuring they could never truly escape Voldemort's call. The early recruitment of Death Eaters followed patterns that reveal much about Voldemort's strategy. He targeted individuals from prominent pureblood families, particularly those with Slytherin connections, offering them a vision of restored magical hierarchy with themselves at the apex. To those from families fallen from former glory, like the Blacks, he promised renewal of ancient status. To those already powerful, like the Malfoys, he offered even greater influence. To those with particular talents or access to valuable resources, he promised appreciation beyond what the mainstream wizarding world provided. Not all who joined did so from ideological commitment. Some, like Igor Karkaroff, were attracted primarily to power and the dark knowledge Voldemort offered. Others joined from fear, believing that the rising darkness would eventually engulf the wizarding world and hoping to secure protection by early allegiance. Still others were coerced through threats to themselves or loved ones, or through magical means like the Imperious Curse that bypassed consent entirely. The inner hierarchy of the Death Eaters reflected Voldemort's manipulative brilliance. An inner circle of his most trusted followers, including Bellatrix Lestrange, Lucius Malfoy, Antonin Dolohov, and others who had demonstrated both loyalty and magical ability, received greater knowledge of his plans and more direct access to their master. This created a competitive dynamic among followers, each striving to prove themselves worthy of greater trust and closer proximity to Voldemort's power. The signature garb of the Death Eaters, hooded black robes and silver masks that concealed their identities, served multiple purposes beyond mere disguise. The uniformity created a sense of collective identity, subordinating individual recognition to the group's fearsome impact. The masks dehumanized both wearer and victim, making it easier to perform acts of cruelty that might otherwise trigger conscience. And practically, the anonymity protected those members who maintained respectable positions in wizarding society from being identified during raids or attacks. Picture a Death Eater gathering during the height of their first rise to power, perhaps in the drawing room of Malfoy Manor, with its grand but cold elegance. Masked figures assembling in silence, none certain exactly who stands beside them beyond the few whose voices or mannerisms they might recognize. The air tense with anticipation and fear, for even among his followers, Voldemort inspired terror as much as devotion. Then the Dark Lord's entrance, commanding immediate obeisance, his high, cold voice delivering orders that none would dare question. The tactics employed by the Death Eaters evolved as their power grew. Initial operations focused on targeted disappearances of Muggle-born wizards and witches, or those who actively opposed pure-blood supremacy. These precisely executed actions, often leaving no trace of the victim, created an atmosphere of fear more powerful than open warfare might have done. Families waited in agony for loved ones who would never return, not knowing their fate with certainty but fearing the worst. As their confidence in numbers increased, Death Eater activities became more public and more terrible. Attacks on Muggle villages, presented to the non-magical world as mysterious disasters, demonstrated both their power and their contempt for non-magical life. The floating of Muggle victims above public areas, the use of the Cruciatus Curse for entertainment rather than interrogation, the deployment of the Dark Mark over sites of atrocity, all were designed not just to eliminate enemies, but to paralyze the wizarding community with terror. The infamous raid on the McKinnons, a family known for their opposition to pure blood supremacy, exemplifies the brutality that characterized Death Eater operations at their height. Not content with simply eliminating Marlene McKinnon, a formidable Witch and Order of the Phoenix member, the Death Eaters destroyed her entire extended family in a single night of violence, leaving nothing but a scene of devastation for Aurors to discover. Such comprehensive elimination of bloodlines became a signature of Death Eater vengeance. Not all Death Eater activities involved direct violence. The infiltration of the Ministry of Magic represented a subtler but equally dangerous strategy. Through a combination of the Imperious Curse, blackmail, and willing collaboration from sympathizers, the Death Eaters gradually established control over key departments and processes. Information about protected individuals leaked to attackers, regulations against dark magical items became unenforced, and the machinery of magical government slowly turned to serve Voldemort's purposes. The corruption of magical creatures formed another disturbing aspect of Death Eater strategy. Giants, historically marginalized by wizarding society, were offered territory and autonomy in exchange for alliance. Dementors, natural allies to darkness given their feeding on human despair, abandoned their posts at Azkaban to join Voldemort's forces. Even in Fairy, corpses animated through dark magic to serve as unstoppable guardians or weapons were created in numbers not seen since the darkest periods of magical history. Among the Death Eaters, certain individuals achieved particular notoriety. Bellatrix Lestrange, perhaps Voldemort's most devoted follower, combined exceptional magical talent with a disturbing pleasure in causing pain. Her facility with the Cruciatus Curse became legendary, as did her willingness to target even children if it served her master's purposes. Unlike many who joined for power or ideology, Bellatrix's devotion contained elements of obsessive personal attachment to Voldemort himself, adding unpredictable fanaticism to her already dangerous abilities. Antonin Dolohov developed a reputation for magical innovation in the service of cruelty, creating curses that caused particularly terrible and difficult-to-heal injuries. The Purple Flame curse he employed against Hermione Granger years later in the Department of Mysteries was but one example of his dark creativity. Survivors of encounters with Dolohov often suffered long-term magical damage that conventional healing struggled to address. Lucius Malfoy represented a different but equally dangerous type of Death Eater, one who maintained a respectable public facade while secretly serving Voldemort's agenda. His wealth, family connections, and carefully cultivated political relationships allowed him to influence ministry policy while simultaneously funding Death Eater operations. This dual existence, respected ministry advisor by day, masked participant in atrocities by night, exemplified the infiltration that made the Death Eaters so difficult to counter effectively. The Lestrange brothers, Rodolphus and Rabiston, demonstrated the family connections that characterized much of the Death Eater organization. Pure-blood families with histories of dark magic often contributed multiple members to Voldemort's cause, creating clusters of relatives whose loyalty was reinforced by blood ties. These family connections sometimes extended across generations, with parents inducting children into service, creating a heritage of darkness that proved difficult to escape. Not all who joined the Death Eaters remained loyal. Some, like Igor Karkaroff, cooperated with authorities after Voldemort's first fall to secure their own freedom, providing names and information in exchange for leniency. Others claim to have acted under the Imperious Curse, a defense difficult to disprove given the spell's nature. Still others, like Regulus Black, experienced genuine changes of heart upon witnessing the full extent of Voldemort's cruelty and plans, though few managed to extricate themselves successfully from service once marked. The fall of Voldemort in Godric's Hollow on Halloween night, 1981, created immediate chaos among his followers. Without their leader's direction and binding power, the unified Death Eater front fragmented rapidly. Different factions adopted different strategies for survival. Some, like the Malfoys, immediately distanced themselves from their former allegiance, claiming bewitchment and reintegrating into respectable society. Others, believing their master would return, maintained low profiles while preserving what they could of his organization and ideology. A particularly fanatical contingent, led by Bellatrix Lestrange, and including her husband Rodolphus, his brother Rabastan, and Barty Crouch Jr., refused to accept Voldemort's defeat. Their torture of Frank and Alice Longbottom, in a desperate attempt to extract information about their master's whereabouts, represents one of the most disturbing episodes in the aftermath of the First Wizarding War. That they would destroy the minds of two respected Aurors, leaving their infant son effectively orphaned, demonstrated the depths of their commitment and the extent to which Death Eater service had eroded normal human empathy. The trials of captured Death Eaters conducted by the Wizengamot revealed the extensive reach of Voldemort's organization. Names that shocked the wizarding community emerged during testimony: respected business owners, ministry employees, individuals from families previously considered above suspicion. The revelation that darkness had penetrated so deeply into wizarding society created a crisis of trust that persisted long after the immediate threat had subsided. Azkaban prison became the destination for those Death Eaters convicted of crimes serious enough to warrant lifetime incarceration. The fortress, guarded by Dementors who fed on the happiness and hope of prisoners, represented a particularly terrible punishment for those whose allegiance to Voldemort had been built partly on the promise of transcending ordinary wizarding limitations, including the fear of suffering. The slow erosion of sanity that characterized long-term Azkaban imprisonment proved particularly devastating to those who had once considered themselves magical elite. During the years of Voldemort's absence, Death Eater ideology continued to circulate in certain pure-blood circles, often disguised as concern for traditional wizarding values or preservation of magical heritage. Children raised in households sympathetic to these views absorbed prejudices against Muggle-borns and half-bloods, preparing a new generation potentially receptive to similar messages should a charismatic leader emerge again. This quiet persistence of ideology helps explain the rapidity with which Voldemort was able to rebuild his forces upon his return. The reactivation of the Dark Marks in 1994, signaling Voldemort's return to corporeal form, sent shockwaves through both those who had remained loyal and those who had renounced their former allegiance. For the faithful, the burning of the long-dormant mark represented vindication and the renewal of purpose. For those who had built new lives, it heralded a terrible choice: return to a master who would certainly punish their abandonment or face the fatal consequences of defiance. The reconstituted Death Eater organization differed in significant ways from its first incarnation. While the inner circle consisted largely of veterans from the First Wizarding War, many new recruits joined with no personal memory of Voldemort's previous reign. These younger Death Eaters, including Draco Malfoy, entered service under different circumstances, some pressured by family expectations, others seeking to prove themselves to a master they knew primarily through legend. The Second Wizarding War saw Death Eater tactics evolve further. The infiltration and eventual control of the Ministry became more complete, allowing for the establishment of policies like the Muggle-born Registration Commission that implemented their ideology through seemingly legitimate channels. Propaganda replaced some need for overt violence, though brutality continued against those who actively resisted. The placement of the taboo curse on Voldemort's name demonstrated their increased magical control over Britain, creating a nationwide alarm system that automatically detected those brave enough to speak their master's name. What psychological and spiritual toll did Death Eater service exact on its members? Accounts from those who survived the wars and eventually renounced their allegiance suggest profound damage to the self. The performance of unforgivable curses, particularly multiple uses of the killing curse, requires a splintering of the soul according to magical theory. The regular practice of cruelty, even when initially distasteful, creates patterns that eventually reshape one's character, and proximity to Voldemort himself, with his fragmented soul and radiating darkness, affected even his most devoted followers in ways they may not have fully recognized. The final dissolution of the Death Eaters came with Voldemort's definitive defeat at the Battle of Hogwarts. Without their leader's binding magic and dominating presence, the organization could not survive as a unified force. Some died in the battle itself, others fled, seeking to escape justice. Still others surrendered, hoping for leniency in exchange for cooperation. The post-war trials again exposed the extent of collaboration and complicity that had enabled Voldemort's regime, leading to painful reckonings within the wizarding community. The legacy of the Death Eaters extends beyond their active years. Families torn apart by divided loyalties, children growing up with the shadow of a parent's crimes or imprisonment, communities struggling to rebuild trust after discovering neighbors had participated in atrocities. These consequences persisted long after the dark marks faded from the arms of Voldemort's followers. The wizarding world's encounter with organized darkness left scars both visible and invisible, individual and collective. Perhaps the most important aspect of the Death Eater phenomenon lies in what it reveals about human nature, magical and muggle alike. The ability of charismatic leadership to transform ordinary individuals into participants in extraordinary evil. The way ideology can normalize cruelty by reframing it as necessary or deserved. The insidious process by which small moral compromises prepare the way for larger ones. These patterns, though manifested through magical means in the wizarding world, reflect dynamics recognizable in non-magical history as well. Yet alongside these sobering insights, the story of the Death Eaters also reveals the possibility of resistance and redemption. Those who refused recruitment despite pressure or threat. Those like Regulus Black who found the courage to turn away from darkness even at the cost of their lives. Those who, like Draco Malfoy, stopped short of becoming fully what their circumstances seemed to demand they become. In these examples lies the reminder that choice remains, even in the shadow of the dark mark. The embers of our fire glow faintly now, casting long shadows across the floor as this difficult chapter draws to a close. The rise and fall of the Death Eaters stands as a warning about the fragility of peace and the persistent allure of power, unconstrained by compassion or ethical consideration. As you drift toward sleep, perhaps consider this question: what small choices in our own lives strengthen our capacity to recognize and resist darkness, whether it appears in magical form or in the quieter guise of everyday compromise? Chapter 12. The Strength of Molly Weasley. As our journey through the wizarding world nears its conclusion, the hearth fire burns with a gentle warmth that reminds us of perhaps the most powerful magic of all, the fierce, protective love of a mother. Tonight, we explore the extraordinary ordinary life of Molly Weasley, a witch whose greatest spells were cast not on battlefields, but in the daily acts of creating a home where courage, integrity, and compassion could flourish. In the gallery of memorable characters who populate the wizarding world, Molly Weasley might at first glance seem unremarkable. She held no prestigious ministry position, made no groundbreaking magical discoveries, and spent much of her adult life focused on the seemingly mundane tasks of maintaining a household and raising 7 children. Yet in this seeming ordinariness lies the secret of her remarkable strength, a power that ultimately proved capable of defeating even the most dangerous of Voldemort's followers. Born Molly Pruitt to a respected pure-blood family, young Molly attended Hogwarts during the 1960s, where she was sorted into Gryffindor. Even in her school days, her warm heart and formidable temperament were apparent. Fellow students quickly learned that her kind nature should not be mistaken for weakness, as her temper, when roused, could be as fiery as her distinctive red hair. It was during these years that she met Arthur Weasley, a kind-hearted, Muggle-fascinated boy whose gentle nature complemented her more forceful personality. Picture young Molly in the Gryffindor common room, perhaps knitting by the fire, a skill she would maintain throughout her life, looking up with a smile as Arthur enters with some new Muggle curiosity to share. Their courtship during the relatively peaceful years before Voldemort's first rise established the foundation for a partnership that would weather the darkest days of wizarding history while maintaining its essential warmth and integrity. After marriage, Molly and Arthur established their home at the Burrow, that wonderfully haphazard dwelling that seemed to physically embody their approach to life. Practical, unpretentious, expanded as needed to accommodate all who required shelter. It was here that Molly began the work that would define much of her adult life, creating not just a physical home but an emotional sanctuary for her growing family. The arrival of each of the 7 Weasley children, Bill, Charlie, Percy, the twins Fred and George, Ron, and finally Ginny, expanded Molly's heart without dividing her love. Each child received the particular attention their individual nature required: firm boundaries for the mischievous twins, patient encouragement for the sometimes insecure Ron, special tenderness for Ginny, as the only daughter after 6 sons. This individualized nurturing within the context of consistent family values created the remarkable diversity of character among the Weasley children, while maintaining their shared core of courage and decency. The magical skills required to manage the Weasley household were considerable, though they might not appear on any Hogwarts examination. Imagine the orchestration of daily meals for 9 people, the laundry for a family of that size, the mediating of inevitable sibling conflicts, all while operating on the limited resources of a single-income magical family. Molly developed expertise in household charms that allowed her to keep multiple tasks running simultaneously, knitting needles working in one corner, while a knife chopped vegetables in the kitchen, and the family clock kept track of each family member's whereabouts. These practical magical skills represented far more than mere convenience. They were the infrastructure that allowed the Weasley home to function as a center of resistance during both wizarding wars. The ability to quickly prepare meals for Order members arriving with little notice, to manage household security charms while attending to other duties, to maintain some semblance of normalcy for her children, despite external dangers. These capabilities proved as valuable to the cause of light as more dramatic combat magic. Molly's relationship with her husband Arthur revealed much about her character and values. Their marriage, a true partnership despite its sometimes traditional appearance, was built on mutual respect and complementary strengths. Where Arthur brought wonder and theoretical knowledge, Molly contributed practicality and emotional wisdom. Their occasional disagreements, often about the appropriate boundaries for their children's adventures, demonstrated healthy tension rather than fundamental conflict, always resolving in united support for each other when external challenges arose. The Weasleys' financial limitations, a frequent source of embarrassment for their children, particularly Ron, never seemed to diminish Molly's sense of capability or worth. She developed remarkable ingenuity in stretching resources, hand-knitted Christmas sweaters for everyone, carefully maintained hand-me-down school robes, creative use of magical cooking techniques to make simple ingredients satisfying. This practical response to limitation modeled for her children a value system where character mattered more than currency, where being rich in love was no mere consolation, but a genuine wealth. When Harry Potter first encountered the Weasley family at King's Cross Station, Molly's immediate inclusion of this lost-looking boy, with his too large clothes and uncertain manner, demonstrated her instinctive capacity for embracing those in need. Without knowing his famous identity, she guided him through the barrier to platform 9 3/4, her matter-of-fact kindness providing exactly what the moment required. This first interaction established a pattern that would continue throughout Harry's adolescence, Molly becoming, in many ways, the mother figure he had lost as an infant. The contrast between the Dursley household, where Harry had been raised, and the Weasley home could hardly be more stark. Where Petunia Dursley's sterile kitchen and rigid rules created an atmosphere of constant tension, Molly's warm, cluttered domain welcomed mess, as evidence of life being fully lived. Her fierce protection of Harry's well-being, from ensuring he had enough to eat to knitting him his own Weasley sweater at Christmas, offered him perhaps his first experience of maternal love since Lily Potter's sacrifice. As Voldemort's power began to rise again, Molly's protective instincts extended beyond her immediate family to encompass the broader resistance. The Burrow became a key meeting place and safe house for the Order of the Phoenix, with Molly's cooking and caregiving supporting those engaged in more visible forms of resistance. Her practical contributions, keeping headquarters habitable, ensuring fighters were properly fed, maintaining communication between various Order members, represented the often unrecognized but essential infrastructure of resistance movements. These expanding responsibilities did not diminish her primary focus on protecting her children, sometimes creating tension between her maternal instincts and the demands of wartime. Her confrontation with Sirius Black over Harry's right to information about the Order's activities revealed this conflict clearly, her desire to preserve childhood innocence clashing with the reality that the younger generation would inevitably be drawn into the conflict, that she ultimately accepted their involvement, though never without concern, demonstrated her ability to adapt her protection to changing circumstances without abandoning its essential nature. The separation of the Weasley family during the height of the Second Wizarding War, with Bill in hiding with his new wife Fleur, Charlie abroad, Percy estranged due to ministry allegiance, Fred and George running their shop in increasingly dangerous Diagon Alley, Ron on the run with Harry and Hermione, and Ginny at Hogwarts under the Carrows regime, represented perhaps Molly's greatest challenge. Unable to physically protect her scattered children, she maintained connection through whatever means remained available, her famous clock's hands all pointing to mortal peril, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. The return of Percy to the family fold during the Battle of Hogwarts, his estrangement healed in the crucible of crisis, demonstrated another aspect of Molly's strength, her capacity for forgiveness without erasure of accountability. Her embrace of her prodigal son, wholehearted despite the pain his absence had caused, exemplified her understanding that family bonds transcend disagreement and disappointment. This moment of reconciliation, occurring amid the chaos of battle, highlighted how personal healing and broader resistance intertwined in Molly's experience of the war. The defining moment of Molly's role in the Second Wizarding War came during its climactic battle, when she confronted Bellatrix Lestrange, Voldemort's most devoted and dangerous follower. The trigger for this confrontation, Bellatrix's attack on Ginny, crystallized everything about Molly's character and power. Her famous battle cry, "Not my daughter, you bitch," expressed with perfect clarity the fierce protective love that had always been her core strength, now channeled into combat magic of extraordinary power. In that duel, witnessed by a crowded hall that fell silent to watch these two formidable witches, Molly revealed magical capabilities that had rarely been displayed before. Her housewife appearance and domestic focus had perhaps led others, including Bellatrix herself, to underestimate her magical ability. Yet in this moment of crisis, with her child threatened, Molly demonstrated combat skills that enabled her to defeat one of the most dangerous dark witches of the age. This was not beginner's luck, but rather the culmination of a lifetime of magical practice, focused now with the full force of maternal protection. The aftermath of the war brought both profound grief and new beginnings for Molly. The loss of Fred created an absence that could never be filled, a wound at the heart of the family's victory. Yet her response to this tragedy, holding the family together, creating space for their collective mourning while encouraging continued living, demonstrated once again her remarkable resilience. The gradual reconstruction of Wizarding society found the Weasley family at its center, their home once again a gathering place, now for celebration and remembrance rather than resistance planning. As her children established their own adult lives, Bill with Fleur at Shell Cottage, Percy rejoining the Reformed ministry, George continuing the joke shop with Ron's assistance before Ron became an Auror, Ginny pursuing her Quidditch career. Molly's role evolved once again. The Burrow remained the gravitational center for the expanding Weasley clan, with Sunday dinners bringing together the growing family, including the spouses who had joined their circle. Molly's nurturing extended now to grandchildren, her knitting needles producing tiny sweaters for the next generation. Her relationship with her daughters-in-law and eventual son-in-law revealed another dimension of Molly's character, her ability to expand her concept of family beyond blood relations. Despite occasional friction, particularly with Fleur initially, Molly ultimately embraced these new family members with characteristic warmth. Her acceptance of Hermione, long before she officially joined the family through marriage to Ron, demonstrated her recognition of emotional bonds as legitimate foundations for family connection. In quieter post-war years, Molly and Arthur finally experienced the comfort they had helped secure for the wizarding world. With Arthur's improved position at the ministry providing greater financial stability, they could enjoy simple pleasures long deferred, perhaps travel to visit Charlie in Romania, attendance at Quidditch matches to watch Ginny play professionally, or simply peaceful evenings at the Burrow. With their home no longer doubling as Order headquarters, the legacy of Molly Weasley extends far beyond her biological children. Her influence shaped Harry Potter during his formative years, providing a model of healthy family life that contrasted sharply with both the abusive Dursley household and the tragic loss of his own parents. Her practical wisdom guided Hermione, whose brilliant intellect benefited from Molly's emotional intelligence and life experience. Even those who encountered her briefly during Order meetings or gatherings at the Burrow carried away the warmth of her concern and the strength of her convictions. What magical lessons might we learn from Molly Weasley's life and character? Perhaps most significantly, she embodies the truth that love is not merely an emotion but a force of tremendous power, capable of creating sanctuary in the midst of war, of healing wounds both physical and emotional, and, when necessary, of defeating even the darkest magic. Her life demonstrates that strength takes many forms, not all of them immediately recognizable as such. The patient persistence required to raise 7 children with consistent values, the courage to send those you love most into danger, because the cause demands it, the resilience to rebuild after devastating loss. These represent power as profound as any displayed on the battlefield. Molly also teaches us about the magic inherent in the creation of home, not merely as physical space but as emotional reality. The Burrow, with its mismatched furniture and crowded rooms, provided security that went beyond protective enchantments, offering belonging in a world where many experienced alienation. This magic of belonging extended to all who entered in good faith, creating a network of connection that proved crucial during the darkest periods of wizarding history. As our exploration of Molly Weasley draws to a close, we might reflect on how her seemingly ordinary magic, cooking charms and cleaning spells, monitoring enchantments and mending incantations, ultimately proved as significant to the triumph of light as the more dramatic magic of duels and defenses. In her capable hands, household magic became resistance magic. Maternal protection expanded to shield an entire movement, and the daily acts of love and care created the foundation from which courage could operate. The fire has burned low now, embers glowing with a warmth reminiscent of the Weasley kitchen on a winter evening. As our series concludes and sleep approaches, consider this final question: what ordinary magic might you possess? What capacities for care, protection, and creation of sanctuary that could, like Molly Weasley's, transform the small circle around you and perhaps, in ways yet unrevealed, the wider world beyond?